All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 1348 meeting of the Wachusett Regional School District School Committee. Today, Monday, July 27th at 7 p.m. This meeting is being conducted remotely using Google Meet in adherence to Governor Baker's executive order. It is streaming live on Holden Cable TV, and for the very first time, streaming live on YouTube for more people to be able to access and view at their ease. We're going to start tonight, as always, with our public hearing. I already have a number of emails in from the public, which I'll be reading to you guys this evening. Okay. Starting us off today is Mary Shepard, who writes to us, "Good evening. My name is Mary Shepard, president of the Wachusett Regional Educator Association, 1320 Wachusett Street in Jefferson. For a teacher's intuition, I believe we all need a little grounding right now. To ground my students in the art room, I begin with a breathing exercise. You can see their transitioning is not always easy, and the pandemic has demonstrated a clear transition can be hard for all of us. So let's begin with a little self-kindness. My students start each art class by taking 3 release breaths. Please join me. Deep breath in and a sigh out. Again, deep breath in and a sigh out. I'm doing it with her tonight. I need this. Last one, deep breath in and a sigh out. We follow with a get your focus on breath, straightening our spines tall and being still. We start with a slow breath in, pause, slow breath out. You have control. Again, slow breath in, pause, slow breath out. Last one, slow breath in, pause, slow breath out. At this point, I ask the students to listen to my singing bowl, and when the sound goes together, let's arrive in art. But here, let's arrive in this moment for the important work for all involved in education. Tonight's focus is survey results of 2 WRE members on how educators feel about school in the fall of 2020. Linda, can you mute yourself?
Sorry.
No worries. The WREA board has been working hard on getting our finger on the pulse of our members, especially returning to school in the midst of a pandemic. Our first survey found 78% of the WREA supports the proposals by MTA, AFT, and BTU for reentry, which includes a phased entry, first teacher return for training and setup of classrooms, for social distancing, second, students and families visit to see the changes and new protocols, and third, students return to school. Fourth is assessing the new classroom curricula, health standards, which is implemented about 6 weeks in. Other areas of the proposal looked at health, safety, modification to state regulations, teaching and learning areas, full funding, reimagined curriculum, most importantly, access to computers and internet for all. Next, the WREA surveyed our members about the 2021 school year reentry. 377 members responded, a strong sampling. When I analyzed the 2 questions together, it was loud and clear how educators feel. 83% of educators are somewhat uncomfortable or uncomfortable about returning to school. Of the whole, half our members said that return to school with proper PPE would return with proper PPE and safety measures. Our biggest concern about return to school, indeed knowing if there would be disinfecting materials and PPE, air quality and proper ventilation, and public health regulations if those were not being followed. The last 2 areas we'll share with you tonight, over 51% of our members are, or one member of their household and family members is part of an increased risk population to be infected with COVID-19. With that said, the next answer about returning to school would not surprise you. 47% of members would like to return to a remote setting only, 36% to a hybrid model, and only 16% would like to return to in-person school with masks and social distancing. Working with many other local associations, reading blogs and articles from other areas in the state and nation, our survey results are similar. I ask you, how many are here ready to hold these school committee meetings in person, possibly with 3 feet of social distancing? My final thought is that our schools are densely populated with poor ventilation at best. Just think for a moment, sports arenas that are densely populated with air conditioning and good ventilation, yet returning to sports arenas is not part of the Commonwealth's plan until a vaccine is widely available. How are these two densely populated public spaces so different? Can we discuss returning to school, learning what others are feeling, learning what risks educators, students, parents, and stakeholders are willing to take? We are beginning to shed some light on why our anxiety fears are warranted. They are warning us for a reason. Are we going to listen? Our next public comment comes from Sarah Smith and Benjamin Smith. Dear Chair Weeks and members of the school committee, as parents and concerned residents of the district, we are again writing to express our concern and displeasure about the AA transportation proposal to pay 75% of the money the district would have paid for bus services during the COVID shutdown period. We noted in our last letter, paying for services not rendered was illegal and only recently became legal under emergency legislation passed just last month. Clearly, spending taxpayer money for nothing in return is not in the public interest. It is worth remembering that we do not legally owe AA transportation anything. When DESE suggested municipalities pay vendors who may be at risk for financial insolvency, this was merely a suggestion, not a dictate. Any payment is made a gesture of good faith on our part to the bus company. To be sure, there are many districts across the Commonwealth who have opted to pay nothing to vendors who did not provide services during the shutdown period. If we decided to pay 0%, which is perfectly legal, we would realize a savings of $1.3 million. Instead, the proposed settlement would have us pay $1 million to AA transportation in a matter that would have been illegal in June. The $300,000 in savings as presented by the district is in fact only a savings if we operated under the notion that we are obligated to pay the vendor in full for services not delivered. We understand these are unprecedented times and that the law was changed to help vendors at risk of becoming financially insolvent. However, this does not excuse the school committee from its responsibility to perform financial due diligence on behalf of students and taxpayers of the town. To date, the district administration has been unable to demonstrate AA's financial vulnerability. This is not the administration's fault, but rather the owner of AA Transportation, Mr. Ron Ernwine. His lack of transparency in detailing his financial need is a problem. It seemed clear from discussion at Wednesday's Business and Finance Subcommittee meeting that the letter he sent asking for 75% lacked the detail necessary for the committee to make a responsible decision. Mr. Ernwine should disclose this official business financial information for analysis by a CPA as a precondition on settling of any amount. Until Mr. Ernwine agrees to this, the district should be conservative with taxpayer money and offer 0%. Asking Mr. Ernwine for full financial transparency should not be seen as an adversarial request. It is clear the district enjoys working with him. Simply stated, this is a responsible and respectful request. Trust, but verify. Those in support of paying the 75% figure frame their argument around the importance of maintaining friendly relationships with our community partners. Yet during the June 17th Finance Subcommittee meeting, one member described the district as being backed into the corner. Our district business director said if we don't agree to 75%, Mr. Ernwine told him he would have to do what he has to do. Is this the behavior of a quote-unquote community partner? No, this sounds like a threat. In closing, it is clear that the district wants to pay AA Transportation to maintain their current working relationship with Mr. Ernwine. Unfortunately, it's also clear the school committee does not have the information it needs to make a fiscally responsible decision at this moment. The school committee is literally facing a choice to either provide programs for students or pay AA Transportation for services never delivered. As a parent, this is no contest. Our money should be going to ensuring kids have access to music classes, world language programs, teachers and counselors who will help them recover and thrive in these challenging times. We understand this is not a simple decision and are absolutely appalled at the apparent bullying behavior of the bus company. We urge the committee to do the right thing, not the easy thing, offer fair payment rooted in evidence, trust but verify. Do not be cowed by threats. Thank you for your consideration. Our next comment comes from Lorraine Nyland from 44 Plymouth Road in Holden, Massachusetts. She states, "Dear members of the Wachusett Regional School Committee, I am writing you today as a 6th grade science teacher at Mount View Middle School and a taxpayer of the town of Holden. I find myself consumed with the thoughts of reopening school. We all want and need our schools to reopen. We long to getting back to as normal as we can, but there is the reality of where we are and what we face in attempting to get there. I never expected that I would express this opinion before, because I feel that students will learn best in collaborative groups within the walls of the school building. However, when one weighs each and every concern, I feel it would be absurd for forced teachers or anyone else, a group that includes students, parents, administrators, support staff, bus drivers, custodial and cafeteria staff, and all others whom they interact with back in the school setting, that a medical expert can say carries a high risk for the spread of COVID-19. My opinion is that reopening school is too dangerous and will be too disruptive. No one disagrees that the students need to be in the classroom. No one disagrees that these are tough decisions to make. But often mandates can be misaligned with the actual circumstances. Are these decisions being made considering the views of those who actually deliver the services, whether it be a bus driver or the classroom teacher? Does this pandemic require teachers to have a new job skill of miracle workers? Teachers are the ones in the trenches doing the heavy lifting. Meanwhile, those who are making these decisions may never have to enforce a child wearing a mask, coordinate social distancing or the illusion of it, staffing the school building, prepare for both within the classroom instruction and remote learning, and or the possibility of fully remote due to infection. Thus far, we've only seen health and safety guidelines. I can only imagine the frustration of building administrators trying to achieve those guidelines. I'm asking the school committee and the school district should consider making a decision right now to open school remotely in the fall and to train teachers now on how to teach remotely. We began teaching in the spring in crisis mode. We are forced to figure it out on our own with no guidance. If we start now, we'll have the opportunity to prepare for distance learning in the fall with purpose and intent while maintaining a focus on equity. There should be clear and consistent guidance with regard to platforms and websites being used by the district. Consistency will help our students become familiar with a finite set of tools for remote learning and not be subjected to numerous websites in different classrooms. Effective teaching can only take place from anywhere where teachers are trained with purpose and given the correct tools. Please consider the parents who need a plan in place. Imagine a scenario where a family has children in elementary school and middle school and having to try to figure out separate plans for their family. Consider parents who are employees of the WRSD and may not live within a district and have different schedules for themselves and their children. Consider the parents who are terrified to send their children to school and will keep them at home. One thing that has me sleepless at night is the feeling of not being prepared. What works best to teach online and assess students? What are the methods chosen by the Wachusett Regional School District to best serve our demographics? I am unaware of any summer webinars planned by the school district on which tools and platforms we should use. Other districts are doing this work now. They are making decisions and preparing their teachers for the fall. My fear is the district will drop the ball with regard to teacher training as they did on the May 11th PD Day. Please ask the superintendent to put in place voluntary webinars for the tools we will need to teach remotely. Many teachers feel like we're in a canoe without a paddle heading for a waterfall. There has not been regular communication to staff from the district. None of us have heard who is participating on the reopening committee and what discussions entailed. Let us avoid scrambling to come up with a plan 1 week before school starts. Being proactive will help parents make the arrangements they need to make. Being proactive will help teachers best prepare to serve their students. All will appreciate time to settle in and prepare for the fall. Thank you. Lorianne Nealon. Right. I believe I might have one more. Hold on. Okay. One comes from Sarah Galvin, who's the director of Safe Place, Rutland Recreation, 250 Main Street, Rutland, Massachusetts. She asks a question. I am sending this email in regards to before and after school programs in the fall. While I completely understand that school committee and the reopening task force have made many decisions in a very short period of time, I am wondering if a decision will be made in regards to before and after school care if school does reopen. After speaking with the principals at both elementary schools in Rutland, they have explained that there is a decision that will be decided on by the task force. Both on Dr. McCall's email from the weekend, I understand that the decision regarding school will be made public on August 10th. In the event that school does open, whether full-time or hybrid, will it also be announced if before and after programs will be able to run? I've already received emails and calls from many parents regarding this, but can't give them an answer. If a decision not to allow these programs to run has already been made, even if school is open, would it be possible to notify the recreation department in each of the 5 towns so that we may let families know so that they have time to prepare as well as inform our staff? Thank you, Sarah Galvin. If members of the public have further questions as we proceed through the meeting tonight, I want you to know that you can email the email questions, just the word questions, at wrsd.net. And I'm going to be able to run the meeting tonight to really ensure that we have focus on your comments towards the end of the meeting tonight. No matter what, those comments will be heard tonight. All right. That being said, Chair's opening remarks. Since March, we've learned much about ourselves as a community. We have learned that in the simple things in life, the things that we once took most for granted are in fact maybe what matters most. A hug from a loved one, a spontaneous visit to a friend, the intense joy of the sound of children playing and laughing together. We've also come to miss the more mundane things in this world, whether it be grocery shopping, a ride on public transportation, or the haircut you may or may not want to get. But perhaps what matters most of all is the promise of a better tomorrow. And nowhere is this more true than in our children's education. Tonight we come together to meet as a school committee to first listen deeply to the administration's proposal for reopening of schools. And as we do so, we must ask ourselves, what here can be held to the high bar that is the promise of education? What can be added to this plan and what should be amended? I myself am full of anxiety like all parents. I too need to know what days, if any, my children will be going to school, and how will that flame of their intellectual curiosity stay lit based on these plans. I look forward to hearing from all of you tonight. As always, we're going to try to keep our comments to approximately 2 minutes. I'm going to ensure that everyone has a chance to speak once before we go through the list a second time. The agenda itself tonight is very brief so that we can really focus our conversation tonight on the possible school reopening scenarios. With that, my students, I see you guys here tonight. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Do you have a report tonight?
I do.
Oh, yay.
To start off, our seniors had a walk across the stage event this week, Monday the 20th and Tuesday the 21st. There was a low student turnout, but we did provide the students the opportunity to get that experience with their families and to enjoy that moment. Also, our guidance department head, Mrs. Clark, is currently working with alumni of Wachusett to work on making system and webinars and online videos to access for high school seniors and juniors who are starting their college process and who are trying to figure out that information, and to have the guidance counselors and alumni provide information on that. And then I do have some survey numbers, and I know you're probably so sick of those, so I'm sorry
No,
for that.
never sick of them. You are my favorite part of these meetings. So go.
So what I've been trying to do in the past few weeks is really connect with different students in different parts of the student body. So one of the things we did was we created an Instagram account that has nearly 500 followers at this point, and we're just trying to grow it even farther. So we took a poll this week to see what students wanted and how I could best represent them at these meetings. So we had almost 400 students vote on this poll for the week, and 33% of the students voted that they wanted virtual training, and 67 voted in person. Then we compared every day in school versus a hybrid in school motion, and 63% of students voted that they would prefer a hybrid motion in school option, and 37 voted every day to be in person. Our number one concerns that we've heard from students are that they're physical learners and they really need the touching aspect of learning and to be able to see it in person. A lot of students are concerned with how the masks will work and if they'll become too much of a hassle and if other students will be playing with their masks and all of that issues. They're worried a lot about if their learning will suffer because they do know in the spring it was a bit of an iffy situation, but they are really concerned that they want to be back learning the way they were. And so they were a little concerned about that. And then they just feel like in school feels like an inconvenience with everything that they're going to have to do with social distancing, hand washing. It's just going to be inconvenient, and that schools just won't be normal, and that's going to affect their mental health more than being out of school will. So the compromise that we've sort of come up with as from the student perspective is that they want a good online version where the students are actually learning as opposed to the issues that we had in the spring, and they need a space for social interaction. So whether it's once a week or once every few weeks where they can come and they can social distance and they can see either friends or teachers and they can actually get that hands-on experience of learning and social interaction that the students gain from schools. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Kanishi with us tonight, so
I don't think he's here either.
All right, but thank you so much. I appreciate your report. Moving on to the superintendent's report. Dr. McCall, are there things you would like to highlight from your report?
I think I'd like to start going through the presentation if possible.
That would be wonderful.
Okay. You give me 2 minutes or more than that. For some reason this is showing up like this. Okay, let's go with okay, can people see this?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so well, first of all, thank you, everyone. I'm sure you're trying to stay cool in the AC. Over the past few days, actually, not even past few days, let's just say since March, I have to send a shout out to my wife for putting up with me working hours upon hours and then not sleeping as well, just because of all the things that we have going on. And I think you heard about some of those earlier with some of the comments that were made in public comments. So I'd just like to thank my wife for putting up with me for the past several months. It's been a long haul, and we still long way to go. So again, this is a reopening overview that we've pulled together over the past several weeks in terms of what we're looking at to kind of move forward as a school district in terms of reopening this fall. So in terms of an overview, this is just a quick little overview. Going to actually go through the parent guardian survey results. We did talk about that a little bit last time. We'll talk about the learning models, the 3 different models, the in-person, the hybrid, and the remote. And then we'll talk a little bit about the support for the reopening models that DESE has put out. And again, DESE puts out new information almost on a daily basis right now. In fact, I had to change this slideshow about a half an hour ago because I had to update something that just came out from DESE around 6 o'clock tonight. So, and then finally, next steps. So the survey results, we had a survey window from the 15th to the 19th where we had over 4,000 respondents actually fill out the survey. When we, and this is just a real quick kind of overview in terms of this part, with the 3 reopening models, the most support was for the hybrid model and the least support was for the full in-person model. There was also, some concerns around tech access, how challenging it would be to have all students in a household have access to technology, as well as transportation and cafeteria. So this first question, if the district implements a 100% in-person learning model with state-mandated safety protocols, how would that work? So the green is my child would most likely attend school in person, so basically 57%. Not sure, that's a 26%, and then 17% is most likely stay home. So this is important because, again, we heard this a little earlier, we want to ensure that we have a robust remote learning model because we have to have flexibility in terms of moving from one model to another this year. We do not know, what's going to be coming forward over the next weeks or months. I actually met with the boards of health from the 5 towns today, and we were all talking about the slight uptick that is starting to happen in the state around COVID cases, and we're keeping a close eye on that as they are as well. So survey results in terms of the hybrid learning model. Again, this is 71% would most likely participate in a hybrid learning model. Again, 17% aren't sure, and 12% most likely stay home and participate in remote. So that hybrid model becomes something that is a little more, I think, worth continuing to look at as we move forward. And this is a 100% remote learning model. If the district implements that, how might that work in terms of families? Not really being sure, deciding to explore some other alternatives to a remote learning model, or they would just participate. So that's the breakdown there. In terms of technology, this was a big one that we were concerned about at the onset of COVID-19 in March and April when we were kind of pushing this out. So does your household have internet access? And almost 100% of the homes have internet access. I can tell you that with the grant that we have applied for, but it's one that we will get. We've actually put in for about 50 Wi-Fi hotspots, remote hotspots that will allow families that don't have access to the internet. We could actually present those to the families, and they could have the ability to access the internet. We did have some families say they couldn't get to it, or they couldn't get it. This was another one that was really important in reference to students having access to a Chromebook or a tablet. So the other thing that we've done is that we've put forth an order for about 1,200 Chromebooks. So that's 1,200 Chromebooks on top of what we had already put out for students. So right now we do have an awful lot of Chromebooks out in students' hands already. And we're looking at our freshmen who are coming up. Again, they will all have a Chromebook, and that's a model that we're going to continue to follow. But then also any families at home that don't have, some might have a computer, and they don't necessarily need a district-owned Chromebook or laptop, but we do have many families that do, so we will be distributing those. And then training around how we're actually going about doing this, and what might help. So about 54% felt as though they really didn't need any training or support. But then 21% and then 24% maybe. So it's almost split half and half. So that's something that we're working on. I know Barry and Bob are starting conversations around how best we can support families as we transition into this model, if that's the case. All right. Then transportation and cafeteria. So how do you plan on getting your child to and from school? So 46% of our families are planning on having students take a bus or a van, 41% by car, and others that, that 8.8% students that don't have access to either one because they're within the walking range, and that probably falls within the blue as well. So when we're looking at this, again, this is an important one for us as we look at our capacity to bring kids in and out of school, and I'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. And then cafeteria, this is our students who would have lunch, purchase meals in the caf. So almost half of our students would not do so. 20% would do so occasionally, 17% most of the time. So when you're looking at this overall amount, probably 24, 25%. And this would also include families who receive free and reduced lunch. And no matter what model we use, we're still going to be providing that to students throughout the school year. So again, one of the things that we did, and we started this a few months ago, working with Director Keenan, we developed a reopening task force, and Brenda did a great job kind of organizing it and pulling it all together. And there were a few major focal points that we wanted to focus on. So really, the first one was student and staff physical health. And the information that they pulled together was really around prevention and screening and monitoring and PPE and cleaning and sanitizing. All of those items are starting to finally come forward from DESE in terms of guidance. At the time of this writing, at the time of the presentation, their last presentation, there was no guidance from DESE, or there was, but it just wasn't very succinct. Mental health, students and staff mental health. Someone mentioned this a little earlier. I think the student representative, in terms of giving kids the opportunity to reconnect in school, having that face-to-face. I think she mentioned the hands-on, the tactile piece. That is really important. It's very important for kids, from preschool all the way through high school. And then academics, focus on remote learning, classroom configurations, implications for staffing and PD and special education. Again, those are items that we continue to look at and focus on, and really want to hone in on a few items as we kind of go through this presentation associated with those. So I'm going to start off first with the guidance that DESE put forth around transportation. They just shared this version of this document. There have been some loose configurations that have been shared with superintendents over the past couple of weeks, but they put forth a solid document the other day, I think Thursday of last week. So as you can note, masks are required at all times for all riders, including kindergarten and grade 1. So every student that's on a bus and driver and or monitor will be wearing a mask. Not more than one student per bench. So basically, when we look at how we typically configure a bus, and if parents are listening, and you at the elementary level, there are many buses, especially in Holden, that max out. You have 3 kids in a seat. In the K-5 schools, Davis Hill, Mayo, Dawson. So this will really kind of parse that out quite a bit. The one good thing is that they have allowed for students from the same family to sit together on a bus. So that way, we could possibly look at how we could further enhance those numbers. Other guidance, keep windows whenever open whenever feasible, and that's really around air circulation. And they actually talked about opening the draft on the top of the roof, the draft holes. Assigned seats, that's another important item that DESE put forth. Kids sit in the same spot all the time. It does, and the main reason is for accurate contact tracing. And then there's also the whole option of exploring bus monitors. It is something that we're looking at. It's whether or not we work with some of our own employees, whether or not we look for volunteers, how that might work. We're still, because again, this information just came out late last week, but I think it's probably something that's important in terms of helping keep kids focused on keeping their masks on and allowing the driver just to drive. This is a diagram of a bus. This is a bus that we would be using. It's a 77 passenger bus, I believe. And the way it's kind of broken down, you can see you have a monitor, a bus driver in blue, monitor in yellow, and then you have the various red dots, and those represent students. So as you can tell, they're on one side of the seat, and then across the hall, or I'm sorry, across from them is another seat where they actually are over 2 more spots. So they're either next to the window or they're next to the aisle. They're next to the window or they're next to the aisle. So, and we'll continue to look at how that kind of plays out. But what that does do is that it affects the overall numbers. So when we're looking at our total numbers in terms of our buses, you can see we're going to run right about 32%. So we have, I believe, 483 passenger buses, and then the rest of our buses are, I think 45 buses are 77 passenger buses. So it's really putting us in the realm of around 1,200 kids, before looking at putting families together. But that's kind of the breakdown for how it might work. And I was talking with Director Didi the other day about the overall numbers that we're responsible for transporting, and it's 6,700 students. So that's something that we're really looking at. And that's also important to go back to the survey information. And we're going to have to really do a much more detailed survey in terms of specific information from specific people around families saying, we're just going to drive this year, we're not going to take the bus, because that will affect how this whole thing plays out. So these are the possible learning models for 2021. And we talked a little bit about this earlier: in-person, hybrid, and remote. So based upon what DESE has kind of put out for school districts, by the 31st of July, we have to really share with them a preliminary reopening plan summary. So we actually got the link to the document the other day. It's pretty short. It's pretty concise. It's not a lot of space for writing stuff out. They're really just looking to try to collect some information to see, what are districts thinking? And really, I think really the most important aspect of what they're looking for is whether or not there are districts who think they're going to be able to open as though it's a typical year with all students in school. Again, with the transportation regulations and restrictions that are now put forth by DESE, I'm not sure how any school district's going to do that unless it's one that has public transportation or there aren't a lot of buses. So then by August 10th, we have to have a comprehensive plan, and that comprehensive plan is really the final plan. What does the school district, what will they do for school year 2021? And that's something that the school committee will vote to support. So we'll be looking for us to kind of define what that's going to be prior to August 10th. Then the school committee will vote on a final plan that I will submit to the Commissioner of Education for his approval. So this is the first learning model, and this is the in-person learning model. And again, it's a full return, typical school. The big difference, though, are the safety measures that would be in place. So it's social distancing on the bus, in the school, on the playground, all the classroom desks, school furniture, the mask requirements for students. So students in grades 2 through 12 all have to wear a mask. Students in K1 are strongly encouraged to wear a mask, and I think someone mentioned that a little earlier as well. I think the mask issue is going to be one that teachers, families, everyone's going to be dealing with in terms of just having that on for a day. We're going to have to give mask breaks to students, and when that happens, they have to be separated by 6 feet no matter where they are. So there's a great deal of planning that is forthcoming with what we're doing. Also, frequent sanitizing and hand washing. As students get on the bus, they have to sanitize. As they enter the school, they have to sanitize. As they, before they take their mask off, they're supposed to sanitize their hand. After they put their mask on, they're supposed to sanitize their hand again. Going to the bathroom back before lunch and after lunch. So, again, Deputy Berlow and I talked about the amount of hand sanitizer we're going to need in this district, and we've already purchased quite a bit, but there's a lot more coming. So again, DESE's tasked all school districts to develop a plan for full reopening in person. So this is the first learning model that we're looking at, and this is an example. This is actually a classroom in Naquag, and here are the measurements. It's 22 feet by 29 feet, 638 square feet. And when we're looking at this, there's a social distancing of 3 feet or 6 feet. So 6 feet is the CDC recommended spacing from, and you've seen that everywhere, and I think that's been the norm throughout the country. DESE has looked at this and has had many health professionals in the Boston area come out and say, if kids are wearing a mask and they are not moving around too much, you can safely be as close as 3 feet. So there is the capacity to kind of either stretch it out to 6 feet or bring it closer to 3 feet.
Daryl, could I interject just for 1 minute?
Sure, Bob.
The reason we're looking to try to do 6 feet in the classrooms is so that students can have a mask break within the confines of the classroom rather than waiting their turn to have to go somewhere else.
So that was Bob Berlow, deputy. Just sorry I didn't introduce you, Bob. So again, the mask breaks are something that will be happening quite frequently. So when we look at this, having desks that are 3 feet close to one another, or it's literally from the edge of one seat to the edge of the other seat. That's how it's broken down. So it's either 6, it could be 5, it could be 4, but the least amount it could be is 3. So we're trying to look at this in a way that would allow us to just have the kids take their masks off at their desks so they don't have to all line up, social distance as they line up, go outside. Some places it's probably going to be a little easier to do that, maybe like a Glenwood that has a large pod area, or Mount View, where the pods are large enough where you could have a class go out into the pod and social distance at 6 feet and take your mask break. But there are a lot of schools that don't have that capacity, such as Naquag, and it's just a hallway, a school that was built in the 1950s. So with the 3 feet social distancing and converting alternative spaces, such as libraries, gyms, our cafeterias, not all of our classrooms and learning spaces will really allow our students to be in school at the same time. So in order to deal with this, one of the things we would have to do is look at renting additional learning spaces somewhere within the 5 towns. So we'd have to look at renting office spaces for classrooms, looking at other areas that we could possibly utilize. And again, there are a number of issues that come up once you're talking about having kids off of the school campus. And the other implications, and this is the one that I mentioned earlier, it was really around transportation. And basically, we have 1,200 possible seats for our students. And the way it kind of breaks down right now, if we had half the kids saying that they're going to take the bus, and we have 6,600 kids, but we're still talking about 3,300 kids that might possibly be using the bus. So it's still something that we would have to work out. DESE has talked about using staggered schedules in order to allow there to be enough buses to run the kids through staggered schedules. And I actually had a conversation with the commissioner directly, because as a regional district, we're not able to do something like that. It's one thing if you're the town of Hudson or Shrewsbury, it's a small enough location geographically where a bus could conceivably do a run and pick up the number of kids that we're talking about, come back, drop the kids off, get them into a class, go back out, do another run. It's much more challenging with us because we will, no matter what, have buses running up to an hour to do that. And then traditional start times would require like at least 48 additional buses. And that's kind of how, when we looked at this, if we were to go about doing this, we'd almost have to double the number of buses that we have. Again, we haven't looked at the families yet to see how that would play out, because that's really based upon, we're going to have to look at how the cohort model plays itself out. But once we look at families and we look at the capacity of the buses in terms of allowing a second grader and a fourth grader from the same family both to go to Thomas Prince, we'll be able to then quantify the numbers a little better. So the second model that we're looking at is a hybrid model. And again, the hybrid model is really one where we have students who are in school for half the time, basically, and they would participate remotely the other half. This allows us to get half the kids into the building at the same time. We have the 3 foot to 6 foot distancing. This gives us more flexibility with that. Instead of trying to get 24 kids into a second grade classroom or 28 kids into a sixth grade classroom, we're talking about half of those numbers. The other important part to remember with this is that having the two cohorts really reduces the cross-contamination. And we talked about that with our boards of health today, and they agreed that having a model where you have the capacity to really spread it out and those groups stay together is beneficial, especially as we kind of move forward into the fall, where we're going to run into flu season no matter what. And again, that's between 10 and 14 students, and it's really a compromise between our in-person, full-blown learning and then our remote learning. So I've talked about this already a little bit, but it really divides the population into two cohorts. So we're looking at a model where you'd have an A and a B cohort. So while one is working remotely, one would be in person. And then we would have some students have the opportunity to attend both or all of the sessions, depending upon the needs of the students that we're looking at. Because again, one of the things we want to ensure is that some of our neediest students have the opportunity to have that in-person experience as much as possible. So two models that are under consideration right now that we've been looking at. The first one is 2 days in person, 3 days remote. So those are two cohorts. So an example would be cohort A, Monday through Tuesday would be in person, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday would be remote. And then B would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday remote, Thursday, Friday in person. And then students with intensive IEPs, maybe sub-separate programs, they would probably attend additional days in order to get those services rendered. This model allows for a little flexibility on those Wednesdays, maybe looking at maybe a half day on a Wednesday, so that there would be the opportunity for teachers to have a little more PD, because again, that's something we're going to have to spend quite a bit of time on this year, is working with teachers around the remote learning model just in general. We also want to have some times available for some deep cleaning if the kids are in the building, and having an opportunity to do that for an afternoon into an evening makes it a little easier, rather than trying to bring people back in on a Saturday or a Sunday. The other model that we're looking at is a 1 week in person, 1 week remote. And it's an A and B alternate weekly, and it would be 4 to 4.5 days. That, we're talking about that Wednesday time is maybe a half day, or Wednesday could be a full day, depending upon how that might play out. And again, same thing with the IEP services. I can tell you that when we talked to the boards of health today about this, one of the benefits that they mentioned around the 1 week on, 1 week off model was that there would be 9 days between a time when a cohort would be in a school versus being remote. And right now the quarantine time is 10 days. So it would make it a little easier to kind of deal with some issues that might come up associated with a student that is diagnosed with COVID or a staff member. So it's something that we spent a lot of time talking about today. Bob and Brendan were also on the call as we kind of went through it, and we all kind of took away from that the aspect of looking at the health parts of this, and really looking at how this might play out, especially with the likelihood that there will be cases of COVID within the schools. It's I'm putting it out there. It's going to happen in some form or fashion. So the final model, Model 3, is our remote learning model. So this is really something that we want to promote, in the sense that it's not going to be what it was in the spring. I think the spring was tough on everyone, and in most school districts throughout the state. this was not something people were anticipating. So as we're looking at this, we want to ensure that there's the capacity for our teachers and our students to have interactions, in a synchronous manner and also asynchronous for learning. So we're looking at having teacher-directed synchronous learning for a whole class, small group, and that would happen at scheduled times during the day. There'd also be independent asynchronous learning, and we're talking about using, and that's really the programs like Google Classroom, Lexia at our elementary level, Actively Learn at the high school level, and then we're looking into other programs, across the board that would allow us to really develop a more robust program. And again, that goes back to the new tools. So having an online library using Screencastify or the Sora online library, which is actually a collection of online books that teachers can assign for students so that they don't have to have one in their hands. So we're looking at how, again, that's going to play out and what the exact model is going to be. But again, for remote learning, it's really going to be something that has to be much more robust. After looking at the responses from our last survey at the end of the school year, I think many parents and I think many families wanted there to be more opportunity for students to interact. So that's that synchronous model, having a live interaction with the teacher and or classmates. And I think that's really something that we're going to stress this year. So some of the other considerations that have come up, and this is what I mentioned a little earlier about DESE putting things out. So this evening, DESE notified all school districts that the 180-day requirement, as well as the time on learning hours, are going to be modified. So this is a quote from Jeff Riley: "To provide sufficient training for educators and staff, I will reduce 180-day and student learning time requirements for 2021 school year to 170 days in 850 hours, that's typically 900, and 935 hours, that's typically 990 for secondary, so long as districts begin providing instructions to students no later than September 16th, 2020. So what that does do is it permits us to have 10 more days on top of the days that we were going to have before school starts to work with teachers, to work with staff around developing really reviewing safety protocols, going through some different modeling, doing a lot of PD around either remote learning or whatever it is that we're going to be ultimately doing in some form or fashion. But it's a good buffer, and I think Jeff Riley, the commissioner, and the MTA and the AFT, the two really large unions in the state, came to some consensus around this because they were a little far apart at one time around this. And I think having 10 days is an excellent way for us to transition back into school. So, and Rebecca, I'm trying to remember what that date is now for the 10-day. Does it start on, is it now the 10th of September?
Sorry, if you did the 5 days, it would be September 10th, Thursday would be the first day of school for students.
Okay. And one thing we'll have to do, and that's on the next slide, is look at our calendar moving forward. And the other thing we're going to do is utilize administrative retreat in August to look at our reopening plans for each school, align those plans to the district reopening plan. And our district plan is going to be aligned to the state plan. So it's very similar to like a strategic plan at the district level, state school level, and then ultimately you have your school improvement plan. So this will be something that follows the same modeling. So the next steps, we're looking at having the school committee vote on a plan prior to August 10th. So we'll be looking at having a special school committee meeting sometime next week. I believe it's Wednesday. It hasn't been made official yet, but it will be. So school committee will review and revise school calendar to support the implementation of the plan. That is something that we need to do. You do vote on the calendar, and we will need to do that as well. And that has to happen before we make a vote on the final plan. We're going to continue to work with WREA. We've been meeting with them weekly and the other groups around developing really strong MOUs to move forward around this coming school year. And then each school will review and implement an approved plan at the building level. And that's very important because, again, we want to ensure that we tie them all together, but the plans are individualized. So, for example, every school has to have, they call it kind of an isolation room. So if there's a student that presents with COVID symptoms, somewhat extreme, the nurse would put on his or her PPE gown, face mask, gloves, bring the student to that spot. There would be a monitor on the outside watching that student until that student can be picked up. So we've actually spent a lot of time, and Deputy Brulot has been working with all the principals over the past 3 weeks, walking through buildings, looking at spaces, figuring out where we can put different classrooms, what spaces could be utilized as learning spaces. Are there any outdoor spaces that we could tap into? Everyone keeps saying, oh, outside would be the best place to learn. It's New England. It's a little more challenging, here versus California or someplace warm. But, we're doing everything in our power to really extend how our schools work. So, ultimately, that's just another item that we're looking at. So that is the kind of overview, right now of where we're at. And, we're here for questions.
Thank you, Dr. McCall. I see we already have a hand raised. So Member Dennis, we'll start with you, but then I'm going to actually start with Member Ottmer tonight and go through the roll, because I believe pretty much everybody has a question or comment. But Mike, since you were so eager, you may go first.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm actually going to use my time. I do have a number of questions, but I'm going to use my time to provide what I think is a pretty important organizational update. And so, thank you for the presentation. And as we as a school committee are hearing this for the first time, and we have our opportunity to provide feedback and ask questions tonight, many of us felt that it was important for community stakeholders to be able to do the same. And so there was a posting earlier today of a special meeting that'll be held for school committee this coming Wednesday, the 29th at 7 p.m. For the purpose of providing a brief presentation of this plan, as well as inviting feedback and questions and opportunity to provide answers. I wanted to point out that there is a provision in our school committee bylaws that allows for a third of the committee to request a special meeting. It's not something that happens very often. In fact, I think the last time was probably about 6 years ago. But we felt that it was important, given that we've asked for information on process and timeline a number of times. Having seen the superintendent's report that came out late Thursday afternoon, there was still no clarity on what the administration's plan was for soliciting this soliciting this feedback, and understanding that the first filing of the summary plans is at the end of this week. So I do want to make folks aware that there's an opportunity for the community to provide feedback and questions, and that is coming this Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Dennis. I was going to mention that, but I'm glad that you did. Member Ottmar?
All right, starting in the middle. This is great. Thank you.
I want to keep mixing it up for you guys.
Nice. I like it. Appreciate it. So I just briefly, I appreciate all the information presented throughout the presentation, as well as kind of an opportunity to look at the survey results as well. And certainly, especially with the update from DESE on transportation, and then some of these other requirements, we have to have 3 plans, but it really does seem like there are only 2 viable plans out there, something fully remote or the hybrid option. I just don't see fully in person everybody back with all the requirements that we would have to put in place with spacing and distancing and transportation and everything. I might be the only one, but I don't see that as being viable. And so so it does help in that that at least gives us really, I think we have 2 options to focus our efforts on as we kind of build these plans out. And certainly even with the hybrid plan, looking at the survey numbers, maybe 20% of parents are going to be keeping their kids home no matter what, my family at least being one of them. And we look at that's going to be like 100 students per every grade. And so regardless of what we kind of work out for our hybrid, for whether it's week on, week off, or 2 in, 2 on, 2 Monday, Tuesday, 2 Thursday, Friday, we need to make sure that we have some type of plan for how we're going to educate those 100 students per grade. Maybe it's like 3 teachers doing remote classes. And so that's not necessarily a separate plan. That's really like a subset of the hybrid plan, because there still is that responsibility to educate those students. And so certainly I look forward to kind of seeing some more of those details for that subset of the remote plan and kind of what that looks like. And again, I kind of eagerly am looking forward to really seeing more of the details about what things look like with the hybrid plan and what our remote plan looks like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Member Otmar. Member Shapiro?
Yes, starting in the middle. I appreciate the report. Thank you very much. One of the things that stood out for me is that I'm encouraged by the recommendation that there's going to be an effort to keep the kids 6 feet apart even when they're at their desk. I was really concerned about the 3-foot recommendation that has been going around, and how people just seem to accept that when it's okay for our kids in school, but it's not okay for people in public, And what I was thinking is that, kids are used to the 6 foot. We've been talking that with them. We've been drilling that into them when we're out in public as parents. And that's just what they've gotten used to. And now we're going to say it's okay to be closer. That made me uncomfortable. Also, I was thinking in a school situation, if we say the rule is 6 feet and the reality is 3, that's probably a little bit more likely with the younger kids. But if we say the rule is 3, then what's the wiggle room? There's none, So I would really like to encourage. I know it poses. I saw the problems. I see the logistics, but the 6 foot really should be something that we stick to as what we're comfortable with as a district and as parents. So that's it for my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Member Silva? Member Silva? Asma, I can circle back if you're having connectivity issues. Just let me know when you're back with us. Member Smith? Excuse me.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the presentation, Daryl, and for all the work you've been doing. And I hope that you're okay. I hear you clearing your throat. I hope it's just allergies and nothing else. I appreciate you working as hard as you've been working. One of my main concerns with the hybrid plan is really the cost that the district may incur, the budgetary implications. I'm thinking about the buses in particular and how that would work, and getting, Dr. McCall shared the complicated nature of that, and I'm just wondering how we can do that and get kids to school in some semblance of time. And the school day would not be the same kind of school day that it was on March 12th and prior. So that's a main concern for me. I'm also concerned about the fact that there are so many details that that the district probably still needs to work out, although everyone's probably working 24/7, but just things like, and it sounds like there's this thinking is going on, but how are kids passing in the halls? What happens when you need to use the restroom? How do kids take a drink? How do teachers take a drink? Just those kinds of things that we took for granted pre-COVID that seem really simple, but are very complicated now. I'm also worried about just the effect on students' mental health and well-being in a new culture where it's going to be a physically distanced setting for them in the hybrid model, and what that does to our younger children and our older children. And I really appreciate our student representative, sharing her perspective and recognizing that, but also having that need for social interaction in some way. So she gave some interesting information for us to consider. And I also am concerned at the data we heard from the Teachers Association sharing the reservations that teachers have. And I think we need to keep that in mind. I know the district works closely with WREA and will address what they can. So thank you. I'm sure my time is close to over. Thank you.
Oh, you did great. Member Williamson? Oh, Member Silva. I think she's back with us. Asma, you with us?
Yes, I am. Okay.
Got it.
Sorry about that. Having some connectivity issues. I wanted to begin by saying that I wanted to thank for that great presentation. And now that we have a few weeks or months to think about all the repercussions and I guess the new normal, as they call it, I still have a few more questions now going into detail. In the hybrid model, you talked about the number of buses, the distance of the desks. What does that mean in terms of cost for the district to be able to apply those types of models is what I'd be interested in. And second of all, my concern is we're creating, and unfortunately we don't have a choice, though we're creating our schools as hospitals. If you're telling me the nurse has to literally turn into like a surgical doctor to take one child who's like probably sneezing, I'm not sure if that creates a very comfortable learning environment for a child. So for those reasons, I'm really hesitating for the hybrid model, maybe less hybrid and more remote, somewhere in that sense. Another thing I would want to ask, and I know you might not have the answer, is when and if do we have to change to remote? So for example, is there a number of students? Is it per school? Is it per district? Does the Massachusetts state guidelines say 5 schools in the state have to, have an, a COVID case for it to say shut down all schools and be remote? Like when will it be that we change to a remote model? And the other thing I'm very concerned about is the number of minutes of actual instruction time. With all the kids requiring hand washing and mask breaks, which they all need, I feel that we're putting our teachers into more of a babysitting role than an actual instructional role. So, and I understand that we're talking about these models, but when we do these surveys, when we're asking these general questions, I'm not 100% sure that all parents, and including myself, understood all these other relevant questions that go along with these kind of models. And let's be honest, about 35, 40 years ago, our school was one of the top rating schools in the state. We're no longer in that category. So since all schools are kind of at square one, this is our opportunity to really shine. So I'm really hoping that our teachers are given all the opportunity, PD instruction, training, to really get back our schools to where we were 35, 40 years ago.
Thank you, Asma. I'm sure Rebecca has taken those questions down because, again, I don't want to spend too much time answering these. But what I'll do is I'll put out, if there are questions that people ask this evening, we'll respond and I'll send it back out to everyone, if that works.
Yeah, that would be great if you could do that in advance of Wednesday's forum, Dr. McCall. So maybe just if Rebecca can record them and you can send them all to us tomorrow, would that be okay?
Yeah, it will be tomorrow or Wednesday.
Okay, thank you. Member Williamson?
Hi. So I also want to start by thanking the administration for all of the work they're putting into these plans. The information is coming out so fast and often so late, and everything's turning on a dime. And, you have something in place and then you're absolutely doing a 180. And, kudos for all of that work, because I know it's a lot. To be in agreement thus far that hybrid or remote is where we need to focus our attention. And I think, in considering the staff survey, I think it's really important for us to consider the comfort level of the staff and, their ability to do their job to the best of their ability, and weighing their comfort and their concerns. And, I think that's an important thing for us to consider. I think for the remote plan, I'm hoping that there's something that we can put in place so that we are putting families in the same cohort, so that, if they've got kids in different schools, those kids are going things, just for their planning purpose. I think it would be beneficial for delivering the instruction, so that families are, when they're trying to learn a platform, they have one, and they can help all of their kids with all of their learning. And like Member Silva said, with the remote plan, I worry about the time on learning, and what are we actually accomplishing by putting people in the buildings, worrying about that safety. I think I have a lot of faith in our teachers to master remote learning. And regardless, they're going to be doing remote learning at some point. And I think it's important for us to consider that time on learning and where their efforts are going. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Chair Weeks, do you mind if I jump in real quick there?
No, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
The second person in a row. So, and Asma mentioned this a little earlier, just the concern around the time on learning, the hours. Deputy Berlow and I have had numerous conversations about this. And yes, we're already talking about one-way hallways. We're talked about Central Tree today, and they have 2 stairwells, and they're not wide enough to sufficiently distance. So one's going to be up, the other one's going to be down on both sides of the building. When we're talking about time, we have to consider everything is going to be slowed down. So kids getting off the bus, they're going to be social distancing. They're going to social distance as they get into the school. Before they're in the school, or right when they get into that front foyer, they're going to have to do their hands. And then they're going to have to go down to their classrooms. We're also looking at probably not using lockers this year, which I think is going to be something that we're going to have to try to figure out, but we've already spoken with the high school about that and some of the middle schools. But, every time there is something that has to happen in terms of a mask coming off, someone's going to the lunchroom, everything's going to just get extended. So all of those extensions, those are the pieces that are going to bite into the educational time, the teaching time, the time on learning. So again, I think this is a challenging part with trying to get the kids back in right now. All districts are kind of in that same boat, looking at it this way, but it will definitely be something that is much more constrained. It's not going to be the same amount of time that they would typically have, because of the restraints that are going to be put on all of us around ensuring that staff and students are safe.
Thank you for addressing that, Dr. McCall. And Kelly, I'm glad your connection stuck with us. Hope you actually enjoy the rest of your vacation. Member Woodland.
Hi, thank you for that presentation and addressing those questions. I think that what I think that I can ask productively tonight falls in 2 camps. One of them is a kind of the what ifs. So the feasibility of doing a hybrid, because I think we all are in agreement in person is not feasible, but the feasibility of the hybrid. What is the decision tree for what constitutes an outbreak and closing? And if there's enough to close, say in Houghton, but not the rest of the schools in the district, does only Houghton close? Do all of them close? Do we treat it like snow days? How does that affect our calendar? So there's that kind of level of it. The breaking into the cohorts, if the students are cohorts, then are the teachers also considered the cohort? And then what happens with subs? And what happens if the teacher's child in another district needs to quarantine? I mean, all of these things I know that you're aware of, but I wonder how aware our community at large is. And when they're answering that they would prefer hybrid over remote or in person or whatever, are they really equipped to know about all of these tentacles spreading out into our larger community, and what they're willing to risk for themselves? Does that impact what they're asking their teacher to risk for us as well? So there's that part of it that I just think clear communication would be really great, just to lay out those options instead of a broad question of what you would prefer. But, for instance, with the NAQUA classroom, how much stuff was taken out of the classroom to space those desks? how much of like, what about adaptive seating? What about just coziness and warmth to the classroom? I think what I keep on imagining, and this is part of how I think of it on a very personal level, is I think of my daughter who's turning 6 this weekend. If she gets upset during first grade and is crying, and I know her, the only way to get her to stop crying, she needs a hug. Is her teacher allowed to hug her? Is anybody allowed to hug her? And that breaks my heart to think, what is this life going to be like for our youngest kids? If one exhibits symptoms of COVID and their nurse has to completely gown up and they have to be watched and monitored and isolated and have a special person watching them like they are the plague, what is that going to do to their mental state? Have we been putting that into our plans for emotional impact? So that there's a lot of that kind of thinking that goes through my head of, is this worth it? Is it worth putting that on our children, on our staff, on our teachers? So then the other half of my question, or the other side of what I'm thinking, is more of budgetary. So now, what percentage of the PPE and other costs that we've already purchased, that we plan to purchase if we're in person, et cetera, how much of that is for sure covered by the state? How much is absolutely going to be reimbursed? Because by our own resolution, we were saying that the state has to fund these COVID costs. So are we getting covered, or is it just a promise, it'll come, or do we actually know for sure it is here? Thank you.
So if I can just answer those real quick, I'll do the last question that you asked. So the governor's funds that he put forth a couple weeks ago, it's a little over $200 million. That money has been made available through the grant. So that's going out. It's around $1.6 million. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong. You don't have to correct me if I'm right. That $1.6 million will be utilized for more PPE. We already have. Gosh, we just loaded 5 pallets that came to central office. That's why I know. So they came to central office last week, and we had to bring them up to the high school. So we had 5 pallets worth of masks. So we're already there. They are providing funds. I can tell you they have been Bessie, Governor Baker, legislature, so forth. They've been very supportive. The issue still comes down to them waiting for the final budget numbers to come from the federal government in terms of stimulus money and so forth to help support local municipalities and school districts. So, again, what we're seeing right now is that $100 billion number that's getting thrown out there for school districts to have access to somewhere down the road, hopefully sooner rather than later, which could help offset some of these costs. But again, out of that $1.6 million, we have to look at 1,200 Chromebooks so that we can ensure that we have kids with enough technology at home, and we're not burdening families because they're sharing a Chromebook and they're both supposed to be on at 9 in the morning to have their morning meeting. So we have to, if we're going to go in one model, we've got to ensure that we can do it. We can do it with some true fidelity. When we're thinking about some of the other things you talked about. Again, I think those are the what ifs. The what ifs are great and grand. There are so many what ifs. That exact question that you asked around when do we decide to shut a school down? We talked about that with our boards of health earlier today. When does that happen? When it's one case and it's in a classroom, does that classroom, everyone in the classroom has to go, okay, but what happens if there was cross-contamination with a teacher and another teacher? That close contact is really the terminology that we talk about. And then you have to look at putting together, giving people the opportunity to say, okay, well, my child was in that close contact, so they have to either quarantine for 10 days and just do remote learning if we're in a hybrid model, or they can go get a test and they could come back. And then we have to think about, okay, but then where's the teacher? So then you have to think about a substitute. Some schools are actually looking at having substitutes only sub in one building. So if you're going to sub at Houghton, you're only going to, and I would probably say Houghton Chocolate because they're connected, but if you're going to sub, you can only sub in that building. So there isn't true cross-contamination. You mentioned things like, your daughter, not being able to get a hug. Those are the types of things that are really going to be challenging, I think, for teachers and for kids. Parents not being able to come into the building, dropping things off at the front door. It's going to look very, very different. And those are the things that we've been thinking about and trying to work through. And, we came to the conclusion that trying to get everybody in here at the same time, that's impossible. We can't do that. Even this next step, I think, is going to be a challenge, having everybody in the building with the PPE. What are the protocols that have to go into place if something happens with, a teacher, or you can't find an adult to help support somebody, or you get 2 or 3 cases happening at once. So and again, there hasn't been, I think, true guidance from DPH around what that threshold number is of people that are in a school or a work, stapled in a office building. We're not sure what that is yet, but they are very much interested in trying to define that as well.
And Daryl, if I could just add to your question, or your answer to Linda. Linda, 2/3 of our PPE costs have been covered by a grant that we have received. 1/3 we've absorbed, and as Daryl mentioned, we're hoping to be able to apply that against a future grant. But as of right now, 2/3 of the cost have been covered by a grant.
Thank you, everyone, for those answers. Member Young?
Thanks. Yeah, just to echo a little bit of what Linda said, some of my big concerns are those contingency plans and logistics, and those what ifs you were talking about. No plan survives first contact, really, but it does provide that framework. Even if we just plan out several what ifs, and then moving forward, it's guaranteed whatever the what if is not going to be the one you plan for, but will allow us to the change in what we need to do will be smaller than if we hadn't planned it at all. And just a lot of that it's all those details that are going to really get us. I do understand that, we haven't received that guidance from DPH. If we ever do receive guidance like that, it's like Desi, it's going to come late, later than we need it. So, I'm much happier with the administration looking at something, making a decision, then as guidance comes out, say, hey, we needed to change what we planned. We changed these numbers, we changed what we did, or we prefer our plan anyway, which is fine. Then one of the other things you mentioned, that just to bring it up and get it out there, compassion within the school building is going to be really important. I mean, it's going to be extremely stressful for teachers, students, administration, and I mean, most of all, the minimal nursing staff that we have. A lot of this is going to fall on their shoulders. Daryl, I was telling you this story earlier today. I have a son who's in a summer program in special ed, and he was sent home a week ago because he's got allergies and he was coughing, and he coughs many times in an hour, and it triggered that, well, he is showing symptoms, and suddenly his teacher was all in the PPE gear and brought him down, put him in the isolation room, but it's that how you do it, and they turned it into a game. He has a lot of needs, but they turned it into a game. He went into the room alone, and they were playing peekaboo through the window and playing games like that. And it's a drive for us. It takes us 40 minutes to get there, but we left immediately, went and picked him up, and he's back at school now. It wasn't an issue, and we're making sure we're staying on top of his allergy pills. But it's that there's a variety of responses you could have there, where it's okay, let's go in the room, or especially for the younger kids, make it at least entertaining for them and not as stigmatizing, really. So Yeah, and compassion for everybody you're working with in the building too, because you don't know what they're dealing with at home, and this is going to be a rough year. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Amos?
Hi, I'm going to leave my video off because having my video on really slows down my connection. Thank you so much for the details in the presentation. It really helps to start to see how this is all fleshing out. I'd like to reiterate Member Ottmar's point about the students who are going to be fully remote from the beginning. And I don't mean this as a question for right now. I'm sure it's probably a later thing, but how will the teachers be able to manage the in-person hybrid students, the remote hybrid students, and the fully remotes? Will remote students be considered part of one of the cohorts, but they're just remote? It just all sounds very overwhelming to me for both teachers and students. So I would just like to understand better how that will work. And that's my only pointer question.
So, and again, that's a great question. Again, one of the things that we're looking at is having people that are remote only, students, families that decide to go that route. They become part of a cohort, so that there's this sense of having a group of kids. You're not just all by yourself, but you're in a class. You're with another group of kids. So we really think that's important, because so much of school, and sometimes people forget this, especially people like, as you grow older, you're like, I really don't need to socialize. I don't need to do this, that, or the other thing. Kids need to socialize. This is where they learn how to socialize. This is where they learn how to be compassionate. This is where they learn how to be great citizens, in our world. And, we have our teachers that help them travel through that kind of experience, and, traversing the highs and lows. And it's really hard to do remotely. And I think that was one of the things. There was a lot of loss this spring on the teacher's part, where they lost that connection, and on the kids' part, where they lost the connection. So we do want to try to do everything we can to try to keep groups together and have some cohesion with students that decide to just go full remote.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Member Ayala?
Hi. So I'm also seeing that the hybrid or the remote model are the models that are most workable too. I do question the ventilation in some of the schools. I know Houghton is like on fire on the hot days, so I question, like, I haven't been in every school in the district, but I wonder how well the ventilation is in most of them. For having those mask breaks, maybe 3 feet apart, in a classroom. So that kind of concerns me a bit if we do go hybrid or in full mode. And in reading the models, I know everybody's saying there is an option to do full remote learning. Maybe I missed it. Was there something in there saying that that will be one of the options that we'll vote on, or is it just going to be across the board that people can choose remote learning?
So that's a good question. I think we tried to frame this, one of the survey questions around that. So if families aren't comfortable sending their kids back to school, all the school districts in the state are providing a remote learning experience for them. So that is something that they can do. They do not have to. If we go back to school full time and they're not comfortable sending their student in, they can be they can have remote learning for the school year. Same thing if we go in the hybrid model as well. In terms of the ventilation, we are looking at that throughout all of our schools. Some schools are newer than others. We're fortunate that most of our schools are pretty up to date. They're not 120 years old, or literally there are schools in our Commonwealth that are 70, 80, 90 years old. One thing that they do tell us in the same way that they put information in the transportation guidance around keeping windows open, they really stress keeping windows open in classrooms just to keep the air circulation going. I think they're starting to see this with the professional athletics. When people are outside, the droplets don't move as far because there's air movement. So we're looking at that. We're really going to try to limit learning spaces that don't have windows and don't have solid or complete air transfer. We want to ensure our univents are all working properly. So we've actually kind of tapped into. We have our own HVAC people. We're probably going to bring some other people in here to ensure that all of the systems are working properly. If we want to make sure that it's safe for the kids and for the staff.
Okay. And then really quick, maybe this is for future, but are the kids going to have PE, art, music still with such a staggered schedule? The library, I know a lot of the library is run by volunteers, so I'm kind of assuming maybe there won't be such thing as library. And are the kids going to remain in the same classroom all day if we do a hybrid model? I guess these are some of my bigger questions.
And again, Melissa, for something like that, when we are looking at keeping elementary and as many middle classrooms together as possible. Where we're not going to have, let's just say I think it's Glenwood, 5th grade. They might have one teacher teaching out of 3. One teacher does math, one teacher does science, one teacher does ELA. Well, it's not going to be like that this year. One teacher will teach all of them, so it's going to be a self-contained classroom. That's really something that has been stressed to all schools. It is going to be a challenge, especially around PE, music. If we're looking at this, and Bob might be able to answer this better, but we're looking at utilizing libraries, music rooms, art rooms, parts of cafeterias, parts of gymnasiums. Part of it is storage, because again, if we're bringing out half of our, and somebody asked a question, that Naquan classroom, typically there is almost nothing in that classroom. You have space in the front. You need a certain amount of space on both sides of the walls between the desk and the walls for kids to move in and out. But again, there are enough diagrams, and there's actually a software program that DESE has shared with school districts that all the principals are actually using right now when they're looking at spaces in their buildings. But that is an issue as well.
Daryl, I would say that in many of our schools that I've been involved with the walkthroughs, the libraries are being utilized for teaching spaces. In many of them, the gymnasiums, at least half, if not a little more, are being used for storage. In some cases, if we're saying that an art or a music is going to visit the classrooms, then we're looking at using their rooms for storage or teaching spaces. It's going to be very different just to get the hybrid model to work. It just is.
And just to interject, that's a good point. Art, music would be on a cart. That way kids aren't moving from one class to another. The art room is coming to you and the music room is coming to you. They just actually sent out guidance, gosh, I think it was late Friday night, around chorus and band and those types of things that it really affects probably the middle school and the high schools the most. And, we'll be spending some time looking at that, because those are going to be challenging subjects to conduct. And I don't mean conduct as in conduct, I mean to happen.
Thank you so much.
And ending with a pun. Okay. Member Bennett.
Hi. So just like everybody, I would really like to thank you for all of your hard work. What I'm noticing right now is that there are a lot of questions on how hybrid would work, right? So there are several questions about how, and what method there would be for online learning, but there seem to be far more of how they would make any sort of in-person schooling work. and in a way that everyone is going to feel, comfortable. Well, nobody, I mean, you're not going to get everybody to feel comfortable, but like most people feeling comfortable with that. And so that makes me worried, because we don't have enough time to fully develop a really, really amazing hybrid scenario. And I think that that focusing on an amazing online, solution right now would be to our benefit, and just putting a lot of effort into making that spectacular so that we have enough time to really make a really awesome hybrid solution. Like, yes, we have to present all three ideas. So absolutely, make them flexible so that we can continue planning those items and planning those situations out for, I don't know, you can put a time limit on it if you needed to, to have like a fully hybrid situation in the next 3 months, or something like that. But I really think that making sure that there's that awesome online, solution. And the reason that I think that is super important as well, and why I feel like it's not going to hurt connection between teachers and students, is because right now, in the world, people are having, therapy online. People are having doctor's appointments online. They're all able to conduct those and have that connection, that emotional connection with the person that they're talking with. Even if they're not in person, they can still have that emotional connection, which I think is super, super important. And even if it's in a classroom of like, 25, people talking with your teacher, you can still feel seen, having your time to talk. Like right now, there's many people in this room and I still feel seen. And that is, the job of the teacher, to make sure that each one of her students is being heard and seen. So really making sure that that program is working. And if there was a connection issue with the last method that we used for spring, then maybe that's not the method that we utilize coming up in the fall. So I think, yeah, so, in regards to, being in person, I don't know what we're going to be teaching them about connection. It was mentioned before, like, people need that connection in person to learn about, being in the world and everything. But what are they necessarily, what do you learn, as a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old about the world if half of what your teacher is saying to you is, we don't hug our friends, so, keep that in mind as well. So not a lot of questions in there, but I definitely believe that we should go, full blast on figuring out online, and then give ourselves some time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krista. Member Brown?
Hi, I want to thank the administration for putting on that presentation on the 3 models. I have 3 questions. And on the 3 models, have you, Dr. McCall, looked at the budget on how that would change? Since we voted on the budget, I'm assuming all 3 models would change. And I know you mentioned like the PPE and getting the grant, but looking at those plans, I'm assuming the budget would change overall.
So we have the bottom line numbers for the budget, Scott, that you guys voted on, way back when. We're still waiting to hear what the state's going to do in terms of Chapter 70 and circuit breaker and so forth. So a little bit of a holding pattern with that. I think what we're attempting to do right now is take that grant money and utilize that for PPE, as Bob mentioned, technology support, anything that is above and beyond. So, and that includes, I think someone mentioned that, some of the software programs, there are some, I think it was Christina, there's some really nice programs, but they're very expensive. And, one of our issues as a school district is that we're big. So oftentimes it's, oh, you have 7,100 kids? Well, that'll be $35 a student, or it'll be $150 a student. There's some programs that are $400 to $500 a course that the state has kind of shared with us and said, hey, if you guys want to do this, it's $400 or $500 a course. That's money that we don't have, we'll never have. So, what we're looking at is really getting the most bang for our buck with what we have. There's not really going to be a change in terms of that type of budget information, Scott.
Okay, so you have looked at the budget, digested it on the 3 models and how it would impact.
Well, so when you're thinking about, so no matter what, we have to build a budget around remote learning. Okay, we have to build a budget around the possibility of hybrid learning, so kids on a bus. What the extra costs are to have kids in a building. We've already purchased all this PPE, and that's one of the things that everyone had to do. You've got to stock up because there's going to be a dearth of this, somewhere down the road if a pipeline is gone in terms of stuff coming in typically from China. So we're again building our reserves as much as possible. But again, there's going to be budgets associated with each one. We're not sure what's going to happen with transportation. If let's just say it's full remote, okay, we're going to go back to the table around transportation again with our vendors, and hopefully not get into the same type of issues that we had, still are kind of addressing from last school year.
And my second question is regarding renegotiating the 8 contracts. I'm assuming because all 3 models are different than what the contracts currently state, that we would have to go into bargaining with the 8 unions. And that only leaves us a month before we start all this. So legal is going to be very busy, I'm assuming.
Yes, they are. I mean, so, when we're talking about this, and Mary Shepard mentioned this a little earlier, just what the MTA is kind of doing around this and how they've come together, and the survey information going out there around how teachers feel about returning or hybrid or remote. Again, we're looking at a different model of education. It's not going to be the same. We are, I have a standing meeting with WREA every Thursday at 11 o'clock, and it can go on for 2-3 hours. I mean, we had one today. We had a negotiation today. So what we're doing is we're expanding the negotiation pieces so that we have the different unions end up kind of building off of some of the other ones. It's really going to be dependent upon the particular union. So some unions we might not have to worry about it as much in the same way that we did in the spring.
Okay. My third question is how often are we going to review our progress on the 3 models? Say we do the hybrid. Do you have something in place to say, okay, how is our progress growing, and what do we need to change, just so we have something to realize that we're being successful?
So DESI's been pretty clear around having student assessments, online assessments, technology assessments, whatever you want to call it, on a fairly consistent basis. I think what that will do is give us that gives us a really nice overview. Then we're also going to have to do surveys in order to really gain that feedback from our constituents around how it's working for them, how it's working for their kids. It's not like having a class of 22 7th graders in the classroom, and you can call you can call the parent and just say, hey, Daryl wasn't doing so well today. Is there something going on at home? Or you can send them an email. This is a little different. So, we're trying, we've got the academic gauge. People have talked about the SEL part, the social emotional piece. Brendan's really going to be focusing on how that's going to play out. Our director of SEL with all of our kids and our staff. So, we're looking at that as well.
Okay, because with the remote that we did in the spring, really didn't work out well. And so if we do remote, I just want to make sure we do have things in place so we can gauge how we're doing.
Yes.
And if we need to change things, to improve it.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this a little earlier, Scott. The synchronous versus asynchronous. We didn't have a lot of synchronous learning. It wasn't something that we really were pushing because again, it was such a strange transition from going to in-person one day to remote the next. This is really the opportunity for us to develop kind of a stronger model because again, we don't know how it's going to play out. You listen to the health experts and it might be a year, it might be 6 months, it might be 2 years. We're not sure. It's not going to be normal for a while. Let's just say that. So yes, I agree with you. We're going to have to, ensure that we're doing everything we can with them.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Member Dennis already went, but if something has popped up in your head, I'm going to circle back to you after everybody's had their first round, if you don't mind. With that being said, Member Gustafson.
I think you can see me this week, so this is good. I have a couple things that haven't been mentioned. I'll just go through them quickly, and then if you have answers, that's great. If not, I think a lot of them will come later. I did have questions about the financial impacts. We brought that up in a lot of detail of business and finance, and so I won't go into detail. However, when you mentioned the cost of some of those academic programs that are remote, that could really enhance our remote learning, I think that illustrates the importance of making this decision. If we decide that it's in our best interest to really commit ourselves to a solid quality remote program that will benefit us throughout the year no matter what as things change, then I think we should be consider spending some of that money that would give us that rather than saying, well, we don't have it, and spending less on PPE and just making a decision as a district that that's going to benefit our students. Because personally, I think that would benefit our students more than having a boatload of PPE. That's just my opinion based on what I've heard collectively. So from a budgetary perspective, I think those things are important. I would be very interested in hearing at some point, hopefully by Wednesday, some update on the special education thinking. I know we've heard they may be more likely to go into the classrooms. I know the summer program has had some considerations around that, so I'd like to hear an update on that at some point and some more details. I am curious about things like science labs and extracurriculars and after-school programs. I know we don't have answers, but I think a lot of parents, when they are thinking about the connections, are assuming that after-school programs and extracurriculars will continue to exist, and I don't think they will, from what I've read. So I think that's something we need to make clear to our families as we lay these things out for them and what it's really going to look like. I was curious if there'd be a follow-up survey, but you just addressed that there hopefully will be. I think in the very near future, perhaps it might benefit us to have, if we think it would be useful in making our decision, to have one now that we've laid out some more detail about what school will look like. However, if we don't think that will matter, if we really are going to just start remote and say that's where we're going for now, we have more time to do that down the road. And my final question was about the hybrid model and the remote model. If we are considering options like that, will we have some flexibility in that to allow students to do their work at different times, to allow flexibility for families where both parents are working and the kids may not be able to have that support they need from 9 to 5. I know that came up in the spring as an issue. I know there are a lot of families with 2 healthcare providers or 2 teachers in their families or single parent households that have to work at home, and they may not be able to support their kids from 9 to, whatever time, 8 to 5 or whatever. I know Desi said we have to take attendance and all of that. And if we're talking about synchronous learning, I think we need to consider some way to integrate some flexibility for those families that might need it. Because a lot of our families, we don't know, just as we don't know the schools, we don't know what businesses are doing. Businesses are going back, calling their employees back as quickly as they can because they're allowed to. But reality is some families are going to be able to work from home. Some families are not. We just don't know. And I think we need to be able to consider that in some way. I don't know how yet, but it's a question. And my final thing was that actually about the cost, I wondered if there'd been conversations with our legislatures about for example, the $400 per course that the state is proposing, and ways to bring that down or perhaps make that a more equitable solution for some of our districts. It seems very unequitable for me for the state to say, we have this option you can use, but it's going to cost $500 a course, and bigger districts can't do that, or districts that don't have as much funding, or districts that have more high need students that have to spread their funding out. It seems very unequitable to me that the state would do that. So I wonder if there's conversations we can have with, at other levels that might help inform that discussion as we go forward. I think that's all my main questions.
Malaya,
I sped through to get it all through in 2 minutes.
Yeah, that was good. Let me jump into that last one at least.
Please
so
do.
So the costs associated with the coursework that I just mentioned, that's a statewide bulk order that they were able to get through DESE at a lower rate. So that's as good as it's going to get. And again, what the legislature's done, they've supported what we're doing. Much of what they have to do, they're kind of in a holding pattern. Yep. I know Senator Goby and Representative Ferguson had reached out and said, there's really no news yet on state funding. So we kind of knew that, and everyone's waiting for the federal government to kind of push forward. So I think that will kind of pave the way for some of these other things. Do I agree with you? Yes, 100%. That's the inequity associated with the funding formula that I've talked about 1,000 times over. It's inequitable. It's not fair. And it puts school districts like ours at a disadvantage.
It does. I just wondered if that conversation was occurring somehow. So, and if it is what it is. I also wondered regarding the survey. I didn't say thank you, but everyone else has, and I do appreciate all the time you put into this level of detail in the discussion tonight and the one that will follow Wednesday, because I know that's a lot of time. But I think it's really important and appreciate that. I also wondered in the survey we've already done if there will be a summary of the comments at some point, because I know that I've heard from a lot of families that they put a lot of the what ifs in there, I'm not sure, in their comments. And I didn't know if there were trends that showed up in those comments that might help inform our discussion as well. So
yeah, you know what? I actually reviewed the comments yesterday morning again, because I had read them when they came in and we had shut it down. And then I reviewed it a little more closely yesterday, just to kind of assess to see how they kind of played out. I think it might be easier for us just to share them all, ultimately, and redact any information that might be personal, but they're excellent. A lot of people are like, just go back to school. A lot of people were like, I don't feel safe sending my kids to school. A lot of people were like, you guys are doing a great job. How are you going to do this? How's it going to work with PPE? The same types of questions that have been asked this evening. It's very, very similar.
I appreciate that, as in that's why I brought up it's helpful. And I think at some point, that's all I said. I said it all. I won't repeat myself.
Malaya, we can definitely do that. We can pull that out, and we can share that with people.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. We can post it on the website as well.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yep.
Member Haber.
Hi. I spent a good amount of time reading through piece by piece the fall remote learning guidance that DESE submitted. And so my comments are really based all on that. The first thing it said is that there's a Learn to Launch program for school leaders and administrators, and that you have to sign up for it. And I'm hoping that we have, and that all of our principals are engaged in that process. The second thing covers time on learning, which we've discussed, but I'm wondering if there's a consideration for extending days so that the bus schedules and the hand washing doesn't cut into that time. It also mentioned that there's 4 sources of tech funding. I'm curious if we've looked at all of those. It also, as Malaya talked about, the 5 options for remote learning, going everywhere from the district providing all of the curriculum with teacher-led services to having full-on courses that the teachers don't have to do anything with options in the middle where it seems like we can purchase content support And that seems like the most practical for us. I really hope that we have a strong remote program on so many levels. I'm hoping that before Wednesday, I know that there's not all the answers, but there's going to be a lot of questions on Wednesday from a lot of parents. And I think that they're all trying to make informed decisions about what the year is going to look like. And if that means they want to know, will teachers be in classrooms with cameras on them if their kid is on a remote plan? They need to know what it's going to look like in order to make that decision. You can't ask them to make a decision and have accurate results in your survey if they don't know if you're doing 50% synchronous learning versus asynchronous learning. If they have to be there from 9 to 2 and they know that their schedule can't accommodate that. But without that information, they can't make that decision. The two other things that I saw in that guidance was that they are still planning on MCAS for 2021, and that bothers me because I think that just based on the spring, kids are far enough behind that it's not going to be an accurate representation. And the other thing that I think parents need to realize that was written in this guidance is that if you start your child on a fully remote plan and then realize that for them that plan is not working and you want to bring them back into that hybrid model, that they're saying that you're looking at 3 to 4 weeks of transition time where you would not be able to necessarily just jump right into that. So from my perspective and my family, I would probably lean toward putting my kids into that hybrid model. And then if that doesn't work, easily transferring to a remote plan. Anyway, I think that's all.
So I think, thank you for reading through that, because what we're finding is that these documents are coming out at different times of the day, and I'll get, the email blasts from the commissioner, and we go through them, we print them out to read them. But again, we just want to ensure. Oh, sorry about that. We just want to ensure that we have, a better place with everything. So.
All right. And can you, Dr. McCall, while you're dealing with your tech issues, or your old-fashioned issues, I don't know if I can call them tech issues, make sure that old-fashioned phone issues, anything that Sherry included, can you put in that document that you're going to be sending out? She had some really great questions in there.
Yep, that's what I was going to say.
All right, thank you. Member Haynes?
Good evening. And thanks. But this time I'm going to say not just thanks for the report, but also I want to thank Daryl for letting me eat up some of his time on Saturday with some questions. I appreciate that as well. Thanks for letting me wreck your weekend. I do appreciate very much the attention that's been given to kids on IEPs. I know there's been consideration about if moms and dads want to keep kids at home for various health reasons. And I recognize that the planning has also looked at the other side, which is kids who are much more inclined to need the personal help for their education as well. That's both of those, those are both, I guess those are the two ends of the spectrum, but they both need their, help as we can give that. I am concerned, like some other people, about costs with all this involved. I know that there are some grants available, some monies available from the state, and obviously I hope we can cash in on that. I'm thinking specifically about the hybrid model. If the cost for the hybrid model, when we talk about maybe buses, even if we're running at reduced capacity, do we need additional buses for that? Not to mention there was talk about work for HVAC filtration and all these other things. If the costs for that are adding up to a point that is going to go beyond what we're going to get from the state, to me, my view is that we still have some serious gaps in our faculty. And if we have money if we have money to spend, I'm more inclined to bring back the faculty as we're able to, as opposed to trying to accommodate a rather jumbled and crazy bus schedule. That's where my head's at. When before this pandemic began, before it all started, we were looking at like 29 positions that we'd identified as needs. Well, 29, it looks like a pretty good number to us now. So that's just a thought there in terms of evaluating the cost of these different things. One of the things that I was bothering Daryl about over the weekend was I was trying to get an assessment of where the staffing is. I understand that in addition to some of the pink slip teachers who have not been asked back yet, in addition to them, there are some holes in terms of maybe teachers who aren't coming back, for example, because they're retiring or something like that. What I would really like, what would be very, very helpful, I think, in terms of me trying to do this responsibly, I would like to have a detailed list of where the holes are, where, what are the grades, what are the schools, and what are the subjects? Because we still are getting questions about, is this subject in, is that subject out? We still don't, I'm embarrassed that I don't have an answer to that. If my friend or my neighbor or my family member or the guy at at Baked in Rutland, if they're asking me a question like this, and I don't know, I want to know. So I would like to know where those holes are. So I will repeat my crazy idea of if we do the hybrid model, that we try to do this by household so that moms and dads can plan. Kids in different grades are out one day and they're home on another together. And I know that I've heard people talk about, what's going to qualify for when schools shut down. One of the main things I hear over and over again is community spread. We are the largest common denominator in our 5 towns, 7,000 kids, hundreds of staff and faculty. And the 5 towns here, we are the largest common denominator. If community spread becomes a problem in any of the 5 towns, it will very likely touch our school system. So that's a consideration as well. And I do actually agree with the point that was raised that if we can't meet in person, how can we send our kids? I mean, if I can't be in a room with you guys, do I want to send Jay to school? The answer is no, I don't. I don't want to do that. So that's it. I hope I was under 2 minutes. Thanks.
If I can just jump in right now, I had this. We had that same conversation, Jeff, with the boards of health today. Around, and that's exactly what I said. I said even if we go back, halftime, so a hybrid model, it's basically 4,000 people who will be, all congregating in 13 different buildings. So this is, if it's going to happen anywhere, typically one of the things they're saying is it will happen in a school. So schools are going to start opening down south, pretty much from Maryland down within the next couple of weeks. So I think that's really going to be the litmus test for Northeast school districts. In places where, it hasn't ramped up as much as it has down south, but it could easily. So it's something we're going to keep an eye on. And I'll talk to Jeff about the staffing stuff. Jeff Carlson, because Jeff and I went back and forth. Jeff went back and forth this weekend with some emails just to ensure that I was kind of on the same page with him, but we'll get that out as well, Jeff.
Thank you for answering those questions. Member Imber, are you with us tonight?
Well, as much as, usual.
Hi.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of questions, and first and foremost, thank you, Daryl, and the administration and faculty. I mean, just trying to figure the details and the logistics out is like overwhelming and incomprehensible, really. So I'm surprised you still have your hair on, Daryl. But
Bob, this is a toupee.
That's I figured. It looks good.
It looks pretty good.
It does. So I have a bunch of questions, though, obviously. What's the threshold between remote and hybrid learning that the state is offering? Like, at what point does the state say, gee, you really have to go to a remote model because the rates in the state are too high. And I'm thinking by the look of your nodding that that's probably there. It's non-existent. Okay. Second question. You gave some numbers in your presentation about transportation, and I wondered if how those compare to the pre and post-COVID numbers. Does the current and along with that, does the current contract with AA accommodate variations that we might have to have in schedule, given that we were supposed to have the buses all day? So, and I don't need an answer right now, but it's a question. And then I wondered, are we going to keep data on the difference of success, however we determine it? And then, of course, is a question too, between the hybrid kids and those kids who are in school all day. But I think that's it, and you know, that's enough.
Bob, those are good questions. Yeah, again, I think the data analysis, you know, there will be a continuum associated with this because it will all be new, especially if we have
bad
models.
Thank you so much, Bob and Daryl, on that one. Member Kirschenbaum.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you to the administration for putting together the detailed presentation tonight. It answered a lot of my questions, but alas, it also raised a couple of new ones. so I'm going to share those with you. One of the comments that I heard tonight is that we are, when it comes to remote versus hybrid, when it comes to hybrid, we're just trying to get it to work. And for me, it just feels like a square peg in a round hole. And the question that I come down to is, what is the value added when we go to a hybrid model? And really, if we're going to hybrid models, it's really not a hybrid versus remote. It's both. And we have teachers who are going to be teaching in school with those children whose parents feel that they can send them. And then there are going to be kids that are at home whose parents are not sending them, who we need to still provide services to. And I just don't have a question on how that, I don't have an answer on how that works effectively and equitably and efficiently. You know, so is there a value added for some of our students? Yeah, probably. Being in the classroom for some of our students is a value added. And if so, we need to be able to identify those students and maybe prioritize them. You know, what is the impact to parents if we are doing remote? And I do like the idea of, you know, a cohort, but we're looking at, you know, 2 and 3, and then 3 and 2, or 1 week on, 1 week off. How does that impact parents? I don't think that we have a good sense of how that impacts our parents. Would it be better to do a 2 in and 3 out so that we could have Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, Thursday, and that's it for the first marking term. And we'll see what happens in the second marking term. And everybody does Friday remote. It also would provide teachers perhaps with some of that time to collaborate and make improvements and provide timely feedback on assignments that they're going to be having to do in class and remote. I don't know how that works. I know that because I don't know how that works personally as a teacher. In terms of the middle school, we know that Mount View has a caseload issue and multiple and extra classes. So if I'm going to get to a point here, and I'm going to try and be quick to stay in my 2 minutes. But let's say we've got a caseload for a teacher of 140 students, right? 14 students in a classroom, that's 10 classes. they still have to see, no matter if it's an A day, B day, they're in over 2 days, they're still seeing their 140 students. So our teachers running around the building for 5 periods a day over 2 days. I'm just getting very granular here, and I just stick with me for a minute. It just seems like a lot of running around. It seems like a lot of running around, and I'm not sure that it provides safety to our staff who are running around still seeing 140 students. They still might be seeing only 10 at a time, or 14 at a time, but over 2 days, I don't know when's the last time you saw 140 people up close and personal. I mean, so my questions are, I guess it goes down to, how do we communicate to parents what this looks like for their students in the classroom, that communication piece to parents, and to teachers and to students, because we need to be able to, as parents, sell it, right? Whatever that plan is that we all decide on, that you decide, and the principals and the teachers all decide on, we need to be able to sell it to our kids, and we need to be able to kind of mentally go through that with them. But the other question that keeps coming up is, what is the value added? How do we make this work and make it work so that it's something that we can be proud of? So those are my questions. I'm sorry if I exceeded my time.
So Laura, I'm probably not going to answer those right now, because those are excellent questions, and those are the questions that I think are kind of being thrown around that we have as well. I do think the more details we put out there for families around what something might look like, be it hybrid, be it remote, the better informed they'll be in terms of a decision-making process. Because again, we don't want to put them in a situation where they're like, oh, I chose a hybrid and I thought it was this, but it's really going to be this. We're putting a lot of time and energy into these 3 models. And I think that's one of the things that, again, we know that first model, it's going to be almost impossible. It's impossible for us to kind of do. So what is hybrid really going to look like, and how is that going to be kind of shared with families, and what's remote going to look like ultimately, and how is that going to be shared? So those are the things that we're pulling together.
Thank you both. Member Lavoie? Matt, are you with us tonight? Check the participants. I'm not seeing him. I'll circle back. Member Long-Balil?
Thank you. A lot of the questions and comments I had in mind have been asked, but I do have a couple to follow up. First of all, thank you, all of you in the administration, for the effort you're putting in into trying to make this work as best it can. It's helpful to know that we have such a committed group of people working on these really thorny problems and these really thorny challenges. So, Member Bennett made a suggestion that perhaps it might make sense to start the school year online, and I think and then phase in a hybrid model. And I think that is something worth considering. We could phase in a hybrid model, maybe starting with the elementary school kids first, since I think remote learning might be the most challenging for them and for their families. And I would also urge that whatever remote learning we do, we should maximize as much FaceTime and or synchronous learning as possible. I think that would be very important. When comparing the week on and week off suggestions with the 2 days in and a day at home and then 2 days out models, I can see from a public health perspective why week on and week off it might be preferable. I think the advantage of 2 days, Monday, Tuesday in, Wednesday everyone's at home, Thursday, Friday, the other half of the class comes in, or the other half of the school. I think the advantage of that is the consistency for kids. They'll know that every week they'll be in school for a couple of days and then they'll be home. And I think that just might be easier for them to tolerate than a week in and a week out. I just think it would create more continuity and certainty for them. And these are very uncertain times right now. So I think whatever continuity and certainty we can create for them, all the better. Lastly, I don't know, to what extent have we been able to confirm the safety considerations for teachers? I realize that this is probably a topic of discussion with the unions, with the union, but whatever you can share about it would be appreciated. One suggestion I've heard is that there should be sort of a plexiglass shield for teachers. I can see advantages and disadvantages to that, but that's something that may be worth considering. And have we come to any agreement about how we're going to accommodate teachers who have serious health conditions that might put them at additional risk? So those are my questions.
Great questions, Linda. Thank you. So I know Director Carlson is looking at how that might work out. They've shared guidance with us around staff who because again I forget what the national stat is, but I think it's at least a third of all teaching staff and people who work in schools are over 50 years old. So we start to kind of fall into that world really fast. And then what are underlying symptoms or underlying health concerns that people might have? So again, that's a conversation that's already going on. We're also looking at in terms of talking about where we're at. We're talking with the union about how some of the specialized programs are going to work as we move into whatever we're going to move into during the fall. But again, we're now talking about, okay, what are those next steps ultimately going to be? So I'll do that on Thursday when I meet with them. And we'll talk about, okay, where are we in terms of PPE for teachers, in terms of training. The really good news, and this was something that I talked directly to Jeff Riley last Thursday night about, was we need more days. We can't just start the school year right off the bat without the opportunity to have the teachers in to review safety protocols, to help them feel comfortable. Maybe even I had a principal talk about the concept of maybe even getting kids in to get them into the school, to have them look at it before they all have to come in during school, and have them hear the arrows in the hallways that kind of point in the direction. So we're really looking at as many ways possible to kind of tap into some of those resources for teachers as well.
And I just have a real quick follow-up, which is there any plan to have any kind of professional development over the summer for teachers?
Bob and I just talked about that today. We're going to be looking at how that. There's a lot of stuff that's out there right now, and one of the issues that we're all districts are kind of doing is it's not all good, and it's just like the sales items that are showing up on my email. It's like PPE and PD and all these things of places I've never heard of, people I've never heard of. So we're trying to be as strategic as possible about saying, okay, if we're going to be doing this, what are we going to need to work with teachers? Because again, we saw it in the spring. Not everyone's comfortable with online learning, but then a lot of people just kind of melded right into it, and it worked out okay. So there's a pretty good sized range. Barry's been talking about that. Bob's been talking about that, and that's really our one of the big things we're going to be focusing on in the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Member Mills, please.
Hi, yes. So just a few quick points. I don't need answers right now, but maybe soon. So baseball, we're not a baseball family, but it lasted like 2 days, right? And the team's already shut down. We have more cases now than we did when we shut down before. Mm-hmm. And Daryl mentioned the Maryland school starting. DC, Metro DC, they're remote. So that's actually not going to be happening. So what I hope that we do is that we see from the administration leadership, and whatever we do right? And we make sure that we are doing it well. And that we're not locked into like, oh, it's just remote or just hybrid, that we develop a plan that's comprehensive, that makes sense for us. For if we are remote, some of the high needs kids need to be in person. They're in small classes, they're smaller transportation. We could be remote, but have some kids that really need it in person. We shouldn't throw out the bathwater with social activities, sports, clubs, outside, whatever, to have some socialization. Because the kids are going to be getting together on the playgrounds, whether we organize it or not. So we should be thinking about ways we can have outdoor things happening. If it's hybrid, you need remote, right? So you need to be planning remote now. And my concern with hybrid, and I want to hear why this is wrong later, not tonight, is that not just are we spending so much time in the room worrying about hand washing, but what is my kid learning when his teacher and her teacher are in person with everyone else? If they're out of school half the time, what are they doing? Like, we can't ask teachers to be superheroes and be two superheroes, right? They're only one superhero at a time, so they can only be doing one job at a time. So I want to know how that'll work downstream. And the week the kids are out, they're just going to be partying outside at Davis Hill all together as a group anyway, and it's just going to happen. When we talk about platforms, I want to see clarity in our reports about what a platform is. I see mixes of things that are LMSs like Google and Canvas, Google Classroom mixed in with things like Castify that's like a screen capture. I want to feel confident that administration knows what each tool does and is clear about what one we're picking, and that there's one platform that's consistent. You have to have a plan to go hybrid eventually. Thinking there's going to be a vaccine in January is a fairy tale. It might be January 23, 24 before we have a vaccine. So even if we start remote, there's got to be a plan for how we eventually get back to school at some point. So that has to be constantly being thought about. A couple other quick things. One, air movement. Where I work, air movement's a concern. If you've got fans, if you've got windows open and they're at face level, you're just blowing air from one kid to the other's mouth. So don't just think, oh, a window open is right. Think about where that window is and where kids are breathing in and out with that window. October 1st, you have your SIMS counts. Make sure whatever you're doing, that we make sure all our kids are taken care of, because if we don't have 7,200 kids on October 1st, next year's budget will be an utter disaster. So we have to accommodate every kid we possibly can, and we need to make sure that we're keeping track of attendance and that they're there. Lastly, legal, make sure that if we have any legal liability for our teachers or our students, that we've thought through. Do the teachers have to sign any sort of any rights to suing the district if they catch COVID? I'm sure that's like a statewide thing, but we really have to be concerned about our liability. Lastly, I want to hear about early retirements coming up, how many people took it and where. And at the end of the day, I just reemphasize, whatever you do, do it right. If it's remote learning, I've been sitting here for 2 hours and 21 minutes just listening to people talk, and I'm not taking a test now. I'm not taking a quiz now. I'm not drawing art now. I'm tired. I don't want to listen to the most brilliant thing anymore. It's too long. So we got to make sure that whatever we do is engaging. It's not 7 hours long. It's thought out. It's modern. And our teachers need help to be able to do that. They want to do the work. We got to help them. We got to get on top of it, because whatever we do, there's going to be a remote component. We got to start helping them now.
Thank you, Member Mills. His questions are quite complex. Do you want to answer those in writing, or do you want to tackle a few, Dr. McCall?
Oh, those are, as you said, it's 922. Those were complex, but very well stated. Very well stated. Again, I think one of the things that we have to continue to do is, as you said, make sure that what we do it well, and we're not trying to spread ourselves too thin in terms of providing some type of educational setting for our kids and for our staff. So yeah, those are good questions. We can come back to those, and I'll put them out to everybody.
So we have Member Mitchell left, and then I have a few follow-ups as well. I can say right now that you work, because I have a lot of public comments to read at the end of the meeting tonight. Member Mitchell.
Oh, thank you. So I don't want to take up too much time, but there's just some points I'd like to make as we think about what models we decide to move through. And I kind of looked at the presentation again. I appreciate the effort that went into it, but I also look at it kind of like a printer, fax, copier. Right? At the end of the day, it has the capability to do everything, but it doesn't do anything really good. And we should really think about that as we're putting the plan to get back into some type of learning in the fall. I think the biggest thing to think about is I saw when we went remote, it was a disaster. And again, it was you know, everyone worked as hard as they could. We just weren't ready. And my fundamental concern is, realistically, if you look at what's happening around the world, and especially in the U.S., to believe that we won't have to go to a full remote session at some point is, we're kidding ourselves. And the other big piece of data is that if you look at all the data that's out there, most children are asymptomatic. So I would think that the thing that's really going to end up happening is that the majority of children will probably be okay, but it's going to end up being transmitted to both teachers and families. And so, again, at the end of the day, we have to think about a policy or a strategy that is not start hybrid, go to remote, go back to hybrid, go back to remote. The other big thing is, if we did put a plan in place, if you look at it, we are looking at a budget of a little over $7 million in transportation. Right? If we were to say, you know what, in 2021, we're going to go full remote, that's $7 million we could figure out, whether we pay AAA some money, whether we use it to buy additional resources, but these are decisions that can be made up front. So I just want to, you know, caution the administration that we have to figure out what we want to do, and just reiterate Member Mills' statement. We have to do it right. And I find it very difficult to understand how we're going to ask teachers to say, I need you to create both a full remote learning plan and a hybrid remote plan and teach both sets of children to the best of your ability. As one of the members said, you know, it would be great if all the teachers could be supermen and women. I just think we're just probably going to ask too much of them. So there's many more things I could say, but I think that I just want to make sure everyone's aware that we just have to do what's right for both the teachers, the students, and the district, all the families that live here as well, and put them in a place that they can succeed. I am all set.
Thank you, Member Mitchell. I'm just going to go back through the hands raised in the chat. I'm actually going to start with Member Silva. Do you have connection, Asma? It's in the chat if you don't. She had asked for, can the changes be listed for our next meeting?
I think I just got back the connection, but you can go ahead and read my question, Megan.
Okay. She asked, can the changes be listed for our next meeting for the hybrid model, the music, gym labs, getting an off bus, cafeteria, etc.? Because it's not just a simple every other day model for the hybrid model, like those things you were discussing tonight about using classrooms for storage, using other places for classrooms, just to have a delineated list, I believe is she's asking for our next meeting.
Yep. That's just so that we can have a conversation, so can the parents understand what that model means.
Sure.
Great. Then coming back to the chat, I'm just going in order here. I believe, Carl, you're all set because of the slugger Kenneth Mills's question knocked it out of the park for you. Catherine, your turn.
I'll just be really quick. I have a really quick question. I'm just wondering what the training for students is going to look like. We've talked a lot about what the training for teachers is going to look like and how we're going to implement that, and that's a big issue. But I also think not every student knows how to use Screencastify or how to use a Chromebook, and we need, even if we're all online, how are we training students in that? And we're already losing 10 days, and can we really expect our teachers, after they've lost 10 days of curriculum, to also be spending their time on that? So how are we teaching students that? And even if we are in person, that's a whole other issue of how are we teaching students to walk through the halls, and how are we doing that? Because I work at a summer camp personally, and we spent 2 9 to 5 days on this, and we still have kids trying to touch each other and all of that. So I just don't know how we're going to make that work. And if you guys have an answer for that, I don't know what your plan is.
Well, again, this is, you know, these are the things that keep us up at night in terms of thinking about how this is going to play out. It's, you know, kids not taking their masks off or touching things, or not, like you just said, 2 9 to 5 trainings, and kids are still not following. Same thing's going to happen in schools everywhere. The one thing that will be a little different is that if it's a hybrid model, you're only talking half the kids who will probably be in there. And then, as Carl mentioned, if we have 20% of the families deciding to go remote, that's you're talking another, couple hundred kids per grade or 100 kids per grade, whatever. When looking at a school like the high school, you have 1,000 kids who would be going in, bring it down to 800. So there's still 800 kids and 150 adults, kind of meandering through the building and so forth. That's a lot of people. And there will have to be days of training in the same way that it happens in a typical school year, where you spend time kind of going through routines. And at the higher levels, it's a little different at the high school. But I know at the elementary level, so much of those first few weeks, it's just all about developing routines, developing skills, having kids get to know one another, doing some academics, doing some socialization. It's the same thing is going to happen here, but it's going to be around, okay, we're going to practice walking down the hall and social distancing. We're going to practice taking off. All of this is going to take time, and it's going to take time away from direct instruction.
Member Gustafson.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify my comment about or question about the special education plan, because that's a very broad question, I realized. I think from from my own knowledge and what I've also heard, and what happened in the spring, is that it would be useful to have not just well, those kids might go back to school, but a little more detail, similar to how you broke down the 3 models, some more detail for families in terms of the life skills program might look like this. And I know these conversations are happening, but communicating that to families. The ABA students might look like this. The developmental program might look like this. And a big question I'm hearing a lot from families is, what will it look like with inclusion families? Exactly. What will that look like if you have a kid that's mostly in inclusion classes, but they're also special education? How will you meet their needs while still actually making them being included? And where will that fall? I'm hearing a lot of families very concerned about that. And that's just my own observation. But I think just as we want to communicate to our general education families kind of what their day would look like, within special education, there's probably a dozen different programs and what it would look like. And I know there's an individualized component, but I think it would be useful if we could lay out for them in some of this discussion, at least where we are now, about what the thinking is about what these days might look like if we bring kids back for particular programs, and how the inclusion students would be handled or might be handled, what you're thinking about that right now, or you and Christine and whoever. I know transportation may be easier because there's smaller groupings there, but just kind of more detail for those families. If they're getting speech and language, what will that look like? Can they do that remote? Are we going to commit to provide all of the services in their grid through a remote model if we can, if they're not in school? I think families need to know that information to make their decisions as well. So I just wanted to flesh that out a little bit, and thank you.
Thank you for doing so. That was important. I also have, I think I have 2 more. Member Dennis.
Thank you. So I have 2 questions. So given that we know that we're offering remote learning as an option for those who want it, it's my hope that we can offer some level of hybrid to as many people as possible. But what was presented tonight was offering a hybrid model to everybody who wanted it. And so I think that's great, except I guess I wonder, is that possible? Is that feasible? Can we really afford, and logistically with staff, with busing and everything else, is it possible for us to be able to offer a hybrid model for everyone who wants it come beginning of September?
So to answer your question, one of the things that we wanted to do tonight was lay out. So again, the state has asked us to give us the 3 models, in-person, remote, and our hybrid model, and just tell us how that would work. So what we're doing is we're developing the plan to say, okay, this is how it would work. Our issue with the hybrid model, and again, it's the same issue that we kind of run into with our in-person, anything in-person. Transportation is something that we would have to really define, because again, these are the conversations we're having. we have buses, and they have 24 slots, and every child has their own spot on a bus, on a bench, and that's theirs. But then you have a family that says, you know what, I can't drive my kid to school today, but they get a bus. It's regional transportation. They pay for it. How does that child get on a bus? Do they not get on the bus? You know, what kind of accommodations do we make? Those are questions that I'm reaching out to Desi about to kind of say, okay, how would that next step work? Because that's going to be an issue. Some other people have brought up some issues around the remote piece, going back and forth versus just remote. Those are other issues that we'd have to address as well. So those are all big pieces of this puzzle that we're pulling together right now. It would be ultimately easier to just say, we're all going to do one particular model. This is it. We're going straight forward with it, and put all of our eggs in one basket versus spreading ourselves out like this. But again, it's, we're tasked with doing this right now and putting this together. Yes, I think it would be very difficult to even do a hybrid model. Could we get the kids in there? Probably. It's just the issue is really going to be around defining transportation.
Yeah, I mean, I think my question was very specific. I mean, as I understand the DESE deadlines for the end of this week, they're really looking for three things. One is a feasibility study on these different models, or basically a feasibility study. Two, an overview of the three learning models, and four is how we address our highest needs. So my question is, given, I assume that we've done the feasibility study at this point in time, is it feasible for us to provide a hybrid model to all of those who want it? I don't think I've got an answer to that question, but I guess what I'll say, if the answer is no, or we're not sure, then I hope that we will put forward a hybrid model that at least brings in and addresses those for whom loss of learning is greatest, as I think Ken Mills spoke to, and those who are the youngest in our community, who I think Member Lung-Balil has spoken to. I don't think it's helpful for us to look at models that are not feasible, but if it is, we certainly would like to know that. Mm-hmm. And if a model for bringing everyone back who wants it is not feasible, then please provide a hybrid model to bring back those who we think are feasible. So that's my question. My second question is really about logistics and kind of how we look at the calendar moving forward here. So we have Wednesday where we have a question and answer session for people in the community. Then, as I heard earlier in the meeting, a week from Wednesday, there's going to be a special meeting, I guess, for the purposes of reviewing a finalized comprehensive plan for the school committee to approve before it's required to be submitted, in essence, 2 weeks from today or 2 weeks from tomorrow. So that's a very tight timeline. For those who I think are watching or thinking about this, there's a lot of things that need to happen in a very, very short period of time. What kind of feedback or information do you need from us and for members of the community, quite frankly, who will be joining us on Wednesday, to be able to get to that step where you're providing to the school committee a comprehensive plan a week from Wednesday?
So ultimately, what we have to do, it's a couple different layers for this. First and foremost, we have to get some more information from parents in reference to details around busing, details around whether or not they're going to specifically be a remote learner, and they're making that decision. So that's an important piece of information that we need to pull together before making any type of decision. Secondly, on the side of school committee, again, I think having the opportunity for people to talk tonight, to ask questions, to bring up more questions that weren't answered yet, I think is really important. And then ultimately, Wednesday night, I think will give us even more information pertaining to, people's thoughts around what this might be. Because again, all of you have been part of kind of these discussions over the past several months. And when we're talking about parents coming in or community members, we want to give them the opportunity to kind of talk through it, to kind of want to be able to hear what they're saying. where they're leaning toward. The issue that we're going to run into, Mike, and this is kind of the reality, and we had this conversation internally quite a bit, is just how much of a challenge is it going to be to run that hybrid model, in reference, because you're really running two distinct models, and Ken said it. If you're going to do it, you want to do it well, you've got a hybrid model, and you also have that remote model. We still have to be able to do it. DESE is pushing us like crazy. What are we going to need to look at? The busing does play a huge role in this. The other part of it is looking at the constraints associated with teachers and teaching staff, and if there are illnesses, how do we then kind of approach that in terms of dealing with it? And again, those are all these layers that, school happens in 5 weeks, 6. Well, it's going to be a little longer now, but it's still something that we want to be able to have a little more control over before we kind of jump down that road. So yes, it's very constrained right now in terms of the time frame. Getting feedback from you this evening has been very helpful. I think getting more feedback on Wednesday night from the community, and then more feedback from all of you again around what we would talk about next Wednesday night would be really helpful.
Thank you, Member Dennis, and thank you, Dr. McCall. Before we move on to the rest of our agenda tonight, I just want to make sure I give time for anyone who had a follow-up question to ask it. Are there any more hands raised before we move on? Member Woodland.
Forgot the mic. I just have a couple questions really quick. One is just about the question of how we focus on remote, what we're doing for remote now, because parents are looking at homeschooling as an alternative. And I believe that would impact our funding quite significantly. So I want to encourage the district, I guess, to really focus on making that remote plan an actual plan versus a promise of it'll be better. But the other part too is that I just keep on coming back to the hybrid question of, and this comes off of Member Dennis's points too, of does hybrid necessarily mean that all kids would be in a hybrid schedule that want to? I mean, we are not required by DESE to give an alternative from in-person to 50% in class while 50% in remote, right? It could be a 60-40 split. It could be a 70-30, where even more, and then an alternative split too of requiring more to be remote versus, and having that option of hybrid might be off the table for depending on situations. But I just wanted to encourage that. The other part too is that with hybrid, it means that we're paying double, correct? We have to pay all the costs of in-person, and we have to incur all the costs of remote. I just want to make sure that I'm accurate in that thinking, and that's where I wanted to add. I know it's going on long.
You're correct in the sense that you have to double up on learning platforms, software, online learning platforms, online programs, textbooks, those types of things. That is kind of ultimately where that cost just increases dramatically. Ken said this a little earlier. I think we want to make sure that we're bolstering that side of the coin, so that this might go on for 2 to 3 years. We might be in remote at different times. We might try to get some kids back, but there's, as you said, Linda, it doesn't have to be 50-50. It could be 60-40. It could be 70-30. However it kind of plays out. We don't have to have everyone in one model or the other. And I don't think that's really how it's going to play out anyway, because we have members here who said, we're probably going to keep our kids home. They're going to do remote learning or whatever it is. We're going to be in that situation, I think, with a lot of families, and we need that data. And I know it's a cart and a horse, ultimately, because some families are like, well, I want to know exactly what it's going to look like. Well, again, we're in the process of pulling all that together. It will happen. A lot of the stuff that occurs is around the guidance from DESE. A little bit's going to probably be dependent upon some of the funding from the federal level. But again, I think we have enough funds that we're able to get from that $200 million grant from the governor that will allow us to get through this first part pretty easily. So I agree. I think this is one of the dilemmas that we're dealing with. How much energy do we put in one particular model versus another, versus just saying, okay, let's just focus on this.
Thank you, Member Woodland, for your follow-up. Member Brown?
Just a quick question on the 10 extra days that DESE's giving us. If we do go to the hybrid or the remote, especially the remote, is that going to be mostly PD days for the teachers to really learn how to handle the remote?
Yes. Okay. I think we're going to use a lot of that time no matter what, even if it's a hybrid model, for those types of things.
Thank you.
Member Haber?
Hi. In task force, we talked about technology in our group, and one of the things that we discussed was having the teachers in classrooms with cameras that follow them as they move, and that being used for remote, but then also being able to keep that in a hybrid model so that we can continue to have some consistency if we do need to go back and forth, or just consistency for kids who are going to be remote some days and in class other days. Also consistency for the teachers in that they're in one place and they don't have to be moved around. That might also be feasible for teachers who are compromised or not comfortable with kids in the classroom, but they can still be in a classroom or in a space, even if it's not a full-size classroom, where they can consistently be online. So I just wanted to make sure that people are thinking about all the possibilities of ways teachers can be remote.
Thank you, Member Haber. Anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to move on to the one action, recommendations requiring action by the school committee. Tonight it is to approve the job description of the superintendent of schools as amended. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Member Mills, would you like to describe the one thing that we just amended in that contract for us?
Sure. So when we were negotiating the contract to extend Superintendent McCall, the committee had discussed the idea that we thought it was not in the superintendent's or the district's best interest for him to be the lead negotiator for the unions, particularly for the teachers union, that puts him in a potentially adversarial relationship with the community that he has to build relationships with. That's not to say that we wouldn't anticipate the superintendent to be intimately involved with all negotiations. He's the person who has the information that's needed and to direct the negotiations, but to be the actual negotiator, we didn't want that to be required for that position. Now, we left it pretty open in terms of that could always be an added thing that's, particularly for some of the smaller unions, that we might ask him to play that role, but that there will be probably some costs associated with this, whether it's an attorney or whatnot, to facilitate some of those negotiations. That was the perspective of the contract committee, whatever we called it. We sort of forgot to talk about that when we voted on this contract. I apologize for us overlooking that, but that was part of the package we had discussed.
Thank you, Member Mills. I see Member Shapiro has her hand raised. Deidre, do you have a question?
Yes, hi. So I don't know if you just said this really quick, but I just want to make sure I understand that when I saw this proposal, my initial question is, okay, if he's not the lead negotiator, then who is going to be taking that role? And I just wanted some clarity on that. Did you just say there's a consultant firm?
Well, in some cases, it may be our attorney, currently Attorney Stoneberg or whomever that may be. In other cases, it could be a member of the Legal Affairs Subcommittee who could play that role. In some cases, it could be the Director of HR who might play that role. And that's a conversation that we could have with the Superintendent as the Legal Affairs Subcommittee. Member Brown is the chair of that, about who might play that role. So it could be a lawyer, it could be Daryl, it could be Jeff, it could be a school committee member. We would have to decide that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Are there other questions or discussions on this matter? Seeing none, we'll go to a roll call vote, starting at the top. Member Amos?
Amos, yes.
Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Member Bennett?
Bennett, yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Member Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Member Gustafson?
Gustafson, yes.
Member Haber?
Haber, yes.
Member Haynes?
Yes.
Member Imber?
Imber, yes.
Member Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Longbeliel?
Longbeliel, yes.
Member Mills?
Mills, yes.
Member Mitchell?
Mitchell, yes.
Member Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Member Shapiro?
Shapiro, yes.
Member Smith?
Smith, yes.
Member Williamson?
Williamson, yes.
Member Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
Member
Hi,
Young?
Megan. You forgot me.
Oh,
Young,
God. I'm getting bad. I was doing a trick on you. Member Silva?
Silva, yes.
And Member Young?
Young, yes.
The chair votes yes, and that passes unanimously. Next on our agenda is unfinished business. We do not have any unfinished business on the agenda tonight. Next is the Secretary's report, which is the approval of the 1347 regular meeting minutes of the Wachusett Regional School District Committee held on July 13th, 2020 as enclosed. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion or amendments to the minutes to be made? Seeing none, we'll go to a roll call vote. Member Amos?
Amos, yes.
Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Member Bennett?
Bennett, yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Member Dennis?
Dennis abstains.
Member Gustafson?
Yes.
Member Haber?
Haber, yes.
Member Haynes?
Yes.
Member Imber?
Imber abstains.
Member Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Longbeliel? Linda, you still with us? I'll circle back to Linda. Member Mills?
Mills abstain.
Member Mitchell?
Mitchell, yes.
Member Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Member Shapiro?
Shapiro, yes.
Member Silva?
Could you repeat what we're voting on? Or you got cut off?
Meeting minutes.
Oh, Silva, yes.
Member Smith?
Smith, yes.
Member Williamson?
Williamson, yes.
Member Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
Member Young?
Young, yes.
And I can physically see Linda. You back?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, yes.
And the chair abstains. The motion passes. We have a point of order. Member Haber.
Do we need a motion to extend at this point so that we have time for public comment?
If you wish to make said motion.
I would like to make a motion to extend
To
for 30
10:30.
minutes to 10:30.
It's been made and seconded. Any discussion on the matter? Roll call vote. Member Amos.
Amos, yes.
Member Ayala.
Raise his hand.
Imber second.
Imber, you seconded?
Yes.
Yeah, I heard you.
Yeah, I had a question, Megan.
There. Are you have a
Megan?
question, Ken?
Yeah. Do you need more than 8 minutes to read these comments?
They're pretty extensive, and I think
Okay.
we may have one subcommittee report.
Okay.
So Bennett said, Member Bennett?
Yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Member Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Member Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Haber, yes.
Member Haynes,
Yes.
Member Imber. Bob, don't leave me now.
Yes. Amber, yes?
All right.
Don't hear?
Gotcha.
I wanted to say no just to mess, but yes.
Oh. Member Kirschenbaum.
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Long-Valile.
Yes.
Member Mills.
Mills, yes.
Member Mitchell.
Mitchell, yes.
Member Otmar.
Otmar, yes.
Member Shapiro.
Shapiro, yes.
Member Silva.
Silva, yes.
Member Smith.
Yes.
Member Williamson.
Yes.
Member Woodland.
Yes.
Member Young.
Yes.
And the chair abstains. If you have the treasurer's report and financial statements were included in the attachments. If you have any questions, please direct them to Director Dede. Committee reports. I believe Ed Sub has met tonight. Christina, do you want to give a quick overview?
Yes, I can do that for you. Let's see. So Ed Subcommittee met tonight. Prior to this meeting, Linda Long-Valile was elected vice chair. We reviewed the recent MASC guidance about the responsibilities of school committees in the reopening of schools. Of note, we focused on our role in policy as it relates to policies under Ed Subcommittee's purview. You'll see these listed on our agenda that was posted previously for the meeting we had tonight, although it's not an exclusive list. With each policy, we looked at them with the lens of, does this policy need to be suspended? Does the policy need to be modified? Does it need to be updated? Or do we need to create a policy during this public health emergency related to COVID-19? We only got to 2 policies tonight, P3130 time on learning and P3311.31 online education policy. In conclusion, we will get another meeting date set probably tomorrow so that we can schedule that meeting prior to our next full school committee meeting so that we can bring some things to you in the near future. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Member Smith. I also know that Business and Finance has also met. Member Dennis, can you give a brief overview of your meeting?
Sure. So the Business Finance meeting met this past Wednesday. On the agenda tonight is the motion to renew Treasurer James Dunbar's contract. Jim has a long, steady presence with the district, and we're very fortunate to have him come back for another year. Also, we discussed the transportation reimbursement at length. The committee, the administration's recommendation was not supported by Business and Finance, and my understanding is they'll continue to attempt to continue their dialogue with them. As it respects the closing of the school year and going into next year, there was an increase of about $600,000 from what was originally planned in revolving accounts that will be made or could be made available for next year. So that's certainly good news. Also along those lines, the administration has informed our committee that they've received information, at least from the DESE, that there is guidance for school districts to expect level funding from the state funding, which would not be as nearly a great a drop-off as we originally planned. So we'll wait to see how that falls out, but that is greater news than we've received in the past. You've also heard tonight that there's administration, there are several grants that were made available for the purchase of PPE and Chromebooks, and the administration has taken steps to access funds available for those accounts. With all that said, we really don't have a lot of clarity into our budget picture for next year because we don't have clarity on what the potential cost impacts for reopening next year could be, even at a ballpark level across these 3 different models. So that is the charge that we've again given to the administration to at least come back to Business and Finance with at least a ballpark so that we can start to approximate what our budget picture for next year could potentially be.
Thank you so much, Member Dennis. And under Business and Finance tonight is a motion to renew the contract between the Wachusett Regional School District Committee and James Dunbar, referred to as the treasurer, for a point of 12 months from 7/1/20 to 6/30/2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. Member Amos?
Amos, yes.
New business. All right. All right. We'll get back to Amos. Yes.
Amos, yes.
Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Member Bennett?
Bennett, yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Member Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Member Gustafson?
Gustafson, yes.
Member Haber?
Haber, yes.
Member Haynes?
Yes.
Member Imber?
Ember, yes.
Member Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Longbelial?
Yes.
Member Mills?
Mills, yes.
Member Mitchell? Ben, you with us? Circle back to Ben. Member Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Member Shapiro? She's back.
Oh, hi. Shapiro abstain.
Thank you. Member Silva?
Silva, yes.
Member Smith?
Smith, yes.
Member Williamson?
Williamson, yes.
Member Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
Member Young? And I'm circling back to Member Mitchell, if he's here. Believe he has left the meeting. The chair abstains and the motion passes. All the other subcommittees, I believe, have meeting dates on the calendar. If you're a chair and have not put a meeting date on the calendar, please reach out to Rebecca to do so. Next on the agenda is the ad hoc subcommittee to negotiate the superintendent's contract. With the job description being approved tonight, there's a motion on the agenda to discharge the ad hoc subcommittee to negotiate the superintendent's contract. Would anybody like to make that motion?
So moved. Or second?
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Seeing none. Member Amos?
Amos, yes.
Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Member Bennett?
Bennett, yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Member Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Member Gustafson?
Gustafson, yes.
Member Haber?
Haber, yes.
Member Haynes?
Yes.
Member Imber?
Ember, yes.
Member Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Longbelial?
Yes.
Member Mills?
Mills, yes.
Member Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Member Shapiro?
Shapiro, yes.
Member Silva? Asima?
Silva, yes.
Member Smith?
Sorry, Smith, yes.
Member Williamson?
Williamson, yes.
Member Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
Member Young? Adam? Check for Adam. Adam, you're here. Adam?
Sorry, Young abstains. I had to step away for a second.
No worries. The motion passes and the chair abstains. Next on the agenda is school council reports. Have any school councils met yet? Not seeing any hands. So we will go now to public hearing, our second public hearing. I have a number of comments that were submitted to me during the meeting today, and I'd like to read them to you now. Questions on planning considerations. Good evening. First, I would like to thank all involved in the effort to coordinate the YouTube live stream of tonight's meeting. It's working well. Second, a question regarding transportation. It sounds like a survey will be going to parents asking more specifically or definitely whether they would drive their students versus bus riding. I understand this will help plan for transportation availability. I think it might be helpful to know if a family commits to driving but has occasional needs for the bus, will that be permitted? Third, with regard to remote learning, who would be teaching those classes, whether hybrid model or solely remote? Would it be a WRSC teachers, for example, taking on both in-person and remote teaching with hybrid, or will be via contracted teachers through a third-party vendor? That's by Corey Burnham Howard of 11 Osgood Road, Princeton. She did add an additional question. I have a couple follow-up questions. If I understood correctly, only 1,183 can fit on buses. With hybrid, that allows for about 2,400. I also thought I heard Dr. McCall say that the district bus is 6,700. So would 4,000 need to choose solely remote in order for it to be realistic for buses to hybrid? Also, if some families choose 100% remote option, whether or not school buildings are open, will those kids be taught the same lessons by the same teachers as those doing in-person or hybrid remote? Thank you again from Corey Burnham Howard, 11 Osgood Road in Princeton. Our next comment is from Brian Kelch. Dear committee members and members of the Wachusett community, as a parent and a scientist who studies infectious disease, I want to express my opinion that in-person schooling needs to be made safe. Risk cannot be completely eliminated, but it can be reduced due to acceptable levels. Many other countries are providing us with blueprints for safe, effective schooling. Let's follow their lead. After reading the reopening plan, I was surprised that testing was not mentioned at all. Testing is one of the critical linchpins in controlling the spread of the virus. If one looks at the countries that have successfully controlled their outbreaks, the unifying feature is widespread and ample testing. Without testing, we rely entirely on the appearance of symptoms in students, teachers, or staff. Due to the explosive nature and spread of this virus, waiting for symptoms is usually far too late. For example, Israel learned this lesson the hard way after reopening their schools too early and with no testing. By the time they even knew they had a single individual on campus who was confirmed to be infected with coronavirus, the disease had already spread to scores of teachers and students. While I understand there are issues with testing, for example, costs, HIPAA laws, etc., innovative solutions are out there to allow for a swift reaction before the virus can effectively spread. Rapid, cheap, $1 saliva tests are available, and he provides a link. Screening of sewage could detect the appearance of the virus on campus. Other testing options could allow a safe and robust reopening. This needs to be part of the plan. The fact that testing wasn't mentioned at all is concerning, as it suggests that there has been a lack of consideration for this cornerstone of infectious disease control. Is testing being considered? If so, what is that plan? From Brian Kelch, PhD. Our next comment comes tonight from Melon Shirtleff. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. From Sterling. 1. How will the district keep groups of students and staff at the high school consistent when all students have different class schedules? It could impact contact tracing. 2. In the hybrid model, will teachers be teaching remotely and in person? Is this a reasonable expectation? What metrics will be used to determine movement among the learning plans? And if the hybrid model is implemented, but others choose remote, will those kids be taught the same lesson by the same teacher as those with hybrid as with remote? The next question comes from Jen Halloran. In reference to Member Silva's questions, Dr. McCall agreed to share a document with everyone recording answers to questions that have been raised. This would be helpful for the public as a reference to questions that have been answered and those that still remain to be answered. Can this document be made available to teachers, parents, or the public in addition to school committee members? Thank you. Our next comment comes from Amy Michalowski from 28 Pinecraft Ave in Holden. Hi. At this time, there are over 230 people watching this meeting on YouTube and possibly likely others watching on Holden Cable TV. Many of the members of the school committee are asking for important questions about the plan for September. Rather than share the answers to these questions with just the school committee members, it would be very helpful if Dr. McCall would post answers to as many questions as possible on the WRSD page so that all interested members of the community are aware of current thinking. I think that all families of the district are capable of understanding that the scenarios might change, but sharing current scenarios with transparency will help people plan for the fall. Our next comment comes from Christina Naiman, a third grade teacher. Dear school committee, I am a third grade teacher and I wanted to share a quick calculation of time taken away from learning during the procedures when we were at school. Forgive me as I am sure I'm missing some transition, but this rough calculation may give some light into a school day of a third grader. Arrival typically takes 15 minutes. With the new procedures of 6-foot distancing and hand washing and sanitizing, we can estimate it may double, 30 minutes. This would be the same for dismissal, so another 30 minutes. Now we are at 1 hour. I estimate it would take about 5 minutes to sanitize before snack and 5 minutes after. This is along with an extra 5 minutes before and after lunch. This puts us at a total of 1 hour, 20 minutes so far. Before and after recess, we'll add another 5 for each transition. This puts us at 1 hour, 30 minutes. We typically have 2 whole class scheduled bathroom breaks that take 10 to 15 minutes. Most likely this will double, 20 to 30 minutes each time. Let's split the difference and say 25 minutes each time. We're now at 2 hours and 20 minutes of transitions and sanitizing, and this does not include snack eating 10 minutes, lunch eating 30 minutes, and recess 30 minutes. When you add snack, lunch, and recess, we're now at 3 hours and 30 minutes of non-academic time, not including mass breaks, by the way. This is a little more than half the day for your reference. Finally, tonight, we hear from Lynn Hanley from 11 Wyoming Drive. Good evening and thank you for your efforts. I have some comments that could perhaps be included for input. 1, DESE guidelines do not include temperature checks upon arrival at school if we have any kind of in-person learning. This is a concern. 2, DESE guidelines do not include retesting for a negative result for students returning to school after quarantine and illness. 3, DESE guidelines encourage carpooling in lieu of taking buses. This seems to be contradictory to social distancing guidelines. One of the proposed hybrid models has some students coming in Monday and Tuesday. How do we address equity issues because of the Monday holidays where that cohort would miss in-person learning? Subs are already difficult to come by. Many of our excellent existing subs are older and retired. It would be hard to imagine they would be willing to sub in these conditions. Surely there are transportation savings if we do a remote model. Those savings can be applied to materials for quality remote offerings. Thank you for the hard work you are doing to support our staff and students. And that is public comment for tonight. Next on the agenda is new business. Does anybody have new business they would like to bring forward to the committee for consideration at a future meeting?
I had a hand, Megan.
Okay. Member Gustafson?
I mentioned this in the chat. I guess it would fall under new business. I had a question for you as to if there are things that you need from the committee or any discussion that you need from us in terms of Wednesday, and if there's anything you needed in terms of questions about, I don't know, I know there's questions about how it's running. We haven't done this before. And I didn't know if there was anything you needed our input on regarding Wednesday.
Not quite yet. I've reached out to MASC. The format that we're using is not a typical school committee format, so I'm working through some details right now. But I will happily take input between now and Wednesday if people have suggestions. Because typically we would be the ones doing the talking, and we're really asking the community to do the talking.
Yeah.
So I would be moderating this discussion, but I have to go through a little bit of O&O stuff tomorrow in order to make sure we're compliant.
I just wanted to make sure that we had time for it if needed. So thank you.
Yep, I'm working hard on it. I believe there's a hand from member Dennis.
Thank you. So I think there are multiple references that were made both during the meeting tonight and during the second public hearing. And that is, a call. And so I make this in the form of a request that, there were a number of questions tonight, most of which were unanswered, many from public hearing that were unanswered. And we know that we'll have some coming Wednesday night. And so the request is that the administration consolidate and put together a composite FAQ based on those questions and answers to be published to the website no later than close of business on Friday. I understand that that's a very tight turnaround, but again, given our very tight timeline for looking at a comprehensive proposal, reviewing on a week from Wednesday and then submitting it shortly thereafter, I think we need to operate on that kind of timeline.
Thank you, Member Dennis. Has the administration noted his request? Just want to make sure everybody heard that.
I'm sure Rebecca got it.
Awesome, thank you. Any other new business before we move to adjournment? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We'll go to a roll call vote. Member Amos?
Amos, yes.
Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Member Bennett?
Bennett, yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Member Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Member Gustafson?
Gustafson, yes.
Member Haber?
Haber, yes.
Member Haynes?
Yes.
Member Imber? Bob's still here.
Sorry about that. Ember, yes.
I didn't lose you tonight, Bob.
Not yet. Thanks.
Member Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Longbeliel?
Longbeliel, yes.
Member Mills?
Mills, yes.
Member Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Member Shapiro?
Shapiro, yes.
Member Silva?
Silva, yes.
Member Smith?
Smith, yes.
Member Williamson?
Williamson, yes.
Member Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
Member Young?
Yes, please.
All right, the chair votes yes. I will see you all on Wednesday evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good
Thank
meeting.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Take care.